Good evening. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Municipality of Anchorage. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Dean. Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Mr. Robinson.
Here.
Mr. Spring.
Here.
Mr. Strike.
Here.
Ms. Barker.
Here.
Mr. Walker.
Present.
Mr. Sporhays.
Here.
Mr. Kange.
Here.
Thank you.
The minutes for September 8th, 2014 in your packet. Are there any changes, corrections, or addition to those minutes? Seeing and hearing none, those minutes are approved as written. Mr. Kange, will you please handle the disclosures?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dean, any disclosures this evening?
She's absent.
Oh, sorry. Ms. Barker?
Thank you. I believe that I was not here for the hearing on item D1D. Therefore, can't be involved in the approval of it.
Thank you, Mr. Sporhays.
None, thank you.
Mr. Spring?
None.
Mr. Ferguson?
None.
Mr. Walker?
No disclosures?
Mr. Strike?
As to the consent agenda, I don't believe I have any disclosures. And as to the public hearing, case 2014019, I believe that one of the participants that would be testifying is a tenant of mine in a rental property.
Is he a tenant of you or the company you work for?
Mine.
Tenant of yours. I don't have my card in front of me. Go ahead, Mr. Kange.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. I'll just ask you a few questions with regard to your disclosure. Bear with me. Do you have any financial interest or private interest in the matter before the body?
No.
Do you have a substantial part of the present action?
No.
Do you have any knowledge that varies or directly and substantially with the outcome?
No.
Do you have any immediate or known or conjectural and dependent on factors beyond the body's action?
No.
Note you've stated you have no significant monetary. Is the information you generally possess, would that be informed by a large group or by an individual?
Say that again.
Would the information that you possess now, would it be possessed generally by a large group or just you as an individual?
By a large group.
Thank you.
I think he participates. Mr. Walker, do you want to make a motion to that effect?
Yes.
I have a motion and a second. What is your motion, Mr. Walker?
I move to direct Commissioner Strike to participate in this action.
Please use your machines.
I could be wrong.
Mr. Strike, you're directed to participate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the gentleman to my right, Mr. Robinson, do you have any disclosures?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have one disclosure. I was not yet seated on the board with item D. I would like to abstain from that. In the notes, I know the machine won't let me just pull one of those particular items, so I will abstain from the consent agenda.
That was D1D as in David.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. 1, 2, 3, 4. We got enough. We're trying to see if we have a short board on that one object. Okay. That gets us to the informational item case 2014-0149, a context-sensitive solutions transportation project site plan review at Windy Corner. Staff, do you have a report?
Mr. Chair, before we reach that item, I think you need to vote on the consent agenda.
No,
You just finished the disclosures.
Yeah, but this is listed out under special order. We're on C2.
Oh, I apologize. I thought you were on.
I won one tonight.
I apologize.
Ow. We're going to quit right now and retire. That's the first victory.
The staff has no report. It's an informational item.
Okay, is there
But
somebody here from?
There is somebody here from the applicant.
Yes, my name is Steve Noble. I'm project manager with Dow HKM for the Seward Highway milepost 105 to 107 project. It is a state DOT project. This is the concept report submittal for the project. It was really intended to be an informational presentation or informational submittal. We'll have a presentation as part of the public hearing after the plans in hand submittal phase, which is probably going to be in the springtime. That's probably April or May timeframe. So I can answer any questions that you may have about the presentation or about the information that you received in your packet. And if not, then we can wait for the more formal presentation in the spring.
Any, yeah, Ms. McConnell, are you in the queue or out? You're out. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. Through the chair, there's issues identified, page 7. It talks about non-motorized facilities, and it talks about it being a well-used bike corridor between Anchorage and Girdwood. And I guess my comment or sort of a question to you is, it's quite a pretty nice facility that I think draws both locals and a lot of tourists from the Bird to Gird Trail, basically. And I see a lot of road cyclists on this section of road. Good for them. I don't know that I would be there, but I guess clarification on whether it's just accommodating sort of a bike lane as an issue, or is there contemplation that we would actually extend that Bird to Gird all the way to Anchorage so that you could really, and then connecting that through, you could connect all the way up, not all the way on the coastal trail, but eventually connect into the coastal trail and Chester Creek. Be pretty amazing facility, and I think would draw a lot of people down there as well as locals. So any thoughts about that? I know there's a lot of constraints in the area, but if you could address it.
You betcha. Through the chair, from a personal standpoint, I 100% agree with you. It would be a world-class facility. And with regards to the Windy Corner project, the scope of our project at the current time does not include any additional separated trail or extension of the what's considered to be the Bird to Gird or Indian to Gird, Girdwood Trail, separated trail. We are designing space for it. We're developing a road alignment that allows space for it on the mountainside of the road, and there is some trail work, as you've seen in the packet, associated with the parking area on both sides of the road. Those trails, however, are not being connected into Indian because our project is kind of this one little mile and a half section. Really, it doesn't even go all the way from 105 to 107. It's more like 105 and a half to 106 and a half. And so there's, rather than have a trail extension on the north side of the road that only goes and then stops at those two locations, where the state has chosen to provide space for the future extension of that trail so that when it does go from Indian northwards towards town, that there will be space for it without impacting the road or having to blast rock or anything like that. So we're providing space for it. As far as the road itself, we're not putting a bike trail on or a commuter bike lane on the road, but we are widening the shoulders, providing a widened shoulder, which is a lot better than currently exists between here and 107. There is a separate project, that planning project that's in the works by DOT, and I happen to be the PM on that project as well, so I know about it, which is looking at a long-term planning study of the Seward Highway from Rabbit Creek all the way to Girdwood, that is contemplating a separated trail and what that cross-section would look like and what it would entail for the entire length from Anchorage to Girdwood, and that project's kind of just in its infancy right now.
Great. I just want to make sure we weren't precluding anything
right
at this point. Sounds
Good
like we're
question.
not. Thank you.
Commissioner Spring?
Yes, a couple questions. I think that's a smart way to go. I've seen other projects along the highway where there's just those isolated segment, and I think it draws a lot of criticism from people unnecessarily, and as long as you have a right-of-way, I think that's fine. A couple things I want to ask about regarding comments. Apparently, this area, Windy Point, is a big windsurfing area. It sounds like it should be Windy Point.
Yes.
And it wasn't clear to me whether there'd be access for the windsurfers to their beach or whatever they're calling their place they take off. I know the emergency response launch area would be off limits, but will they be able to continue to recreate there with windsurfing?
They will be able to continue to access that area, and the parking area that is on that side of the road will have an overlook area as well as trails that will connect down to an underpass that would go underneath the rail facility, so that people will be able to walk underneath the railroad tracks to get access to the river or to the inlet. At least that's the way it's conceptualized right now. That frankly is the most kind of up in the air part of the design of the concept that we've submitted so far, is exactly what that trail connection to the inlet will look like. We have received comments from emergency services requesting consideration of access, and we're still working with the state's coastal design staff to try to come up with a concept that works at this location that won't simply wash away when there's the first really high tide and strong winds combined. So we're trying to come up with a concept that will work there, that will enable both emergency access as well as pedestrians to potentially walk underneath the rail at this location to try to minimize the railroad trespass issues, which is a big concern existing and in the future for the Alaska Railroad at this location and other locations, but particularly where we provide a pull-off on that southern side of the road. You get a lot of pedestrians encouraged to, just by having that parking area there, it encourages pedestrians to cross the tracks, and the railroad really wants to prevent that to the extent that we can. So we're using, when you look at our concept design, you'll see that there's a kind of a grade elevation difference between the overlook from the parking area and the railroad tracks. It's not easy for pedestrians to kind of walk down and cross the tracks. And we're going to try to route them to a walkway that gets them down and under a pedestrian underpass. And we'll have more information and be able to present that better at the plans in hand stage, and we'll have a better concept of whether or not we're going to be able to accommodate the emergency access at this location. It may or may not be able to be included in the project, depending on if we can make it work from a cost as well as a constructability standpoint, and if it's worth and if what we can actually provide the emergency services folks is going to be consistent with what they need. They need the vehicle that they would like to be able to access that side of the railroad tracks is kind of a 1-ton pickup pulling a small trailer that a jet ski type vehicle would be on, and the ability to get that underneath the railroad tracks and to turn around and then be able to come back out is what we're struggling with right now.
One other question, if I may, Mr. Chair. So I saw the memorandum of agreement between the Department of Natural Resources, the railroad, and the DOT, and I didn't see any comments from either one of those other agencies regarding the concept plan. Were they involved in the development of the concept plan, and is there any kind of implicit approval from these agencies or these entities?
So are you talking about a memorandum of agreement from the early 2000s?
It was a long time ago,
Yeah.
right. But,
Right.
well, obviously, there's some right-of-way from the railroad. There's also you'll need some property or you'll impact Chugach State Park.
That's correct.
So I'm just wondering what kind of input.
Okay, so through the chair, the memorandum of agreement has expired between those three entities, and so there is not currently a memorandum of agreement in place between the three agencies. The state has renewed efforts to begin to renew that memorandum of agreement. Nevertheless, we have been having what we call agency advisory group meetings periodically working with DNR and with Alaska Railroad to keep them all in the loop. In this particular case, and actually anywhere along the Seward Highway between Anchorage and Girdwood, the Chugach State Park accepted land and water conservation funds for acquisition of park area, and has made it so that any time a road or rail project goes outside of the existing rights-of-way and has to acquire space from Chugach State Park, which in most areas is on both sides of the road and rail alignments. It's all the way out into the middle of the inlet. And so anytime the road or rail alignment is realigned and goes outside of those existing rights-of-way, if federal money is spent on the project, then the project has to go through the conversion process, which is Section 6F portion of the Federal Highways ordinances that covers this section of the NEPA process that's required for this. So it's a fairly lengthy process where we have to actually go and acquire land somewhere else that's of equal or similar value, and then dedicate that as part of the park to make the park whole, essentially, from the land that we're converting from parkland to road or rail right-of-way. And so it's about it's a lengthy 18-month process, similar to what we did on what's been done in Eagle River and on the Dowling Phase 1 project, if you're familiar with that one.
So when we see the plans in hands, we'll see that some type of comment from those entities and regarding the planning concept, or do you expect they'll comment on it then?
I'm trying to think of what they might, what we might have in place by then. Right now, the appraisals are in progress for appraising the value of the land that we're acquiring for the road and rail right-of-way. By then, I envision that we will have identified the target parcels for converting to parkland in exchange for the land. But I'm not sure that there is any type of written. I'll have to look into that, into whether or not there's any type of written concurrence. I think there is a conversion process, concurrence process from the DNR, but the railroad and DNR, we're going to continue to pursue the getting the MOA in place, and they're going to be both the railroad and DNR both have to agree to this. DNR has to, in order for these parking lots and everything to become a reality, DNR will be needing to take over the maintenance responsibility for these parking areas, and so the state's frankly not going to build them unless those agreements are in place.
I guess I would be interested in seeing some type of comment from the Chugach State Park Board, Advisory Board, for instance. Seems like it'd be appropriate to take it before them and have them comment on it. I mean, you have stakeholders, right? Stakeholder groups that should be commenting, and they do have responsibilities, I think, for reviewing plans and
sure,
impacts on the...
Yeah, and Tom Harrison, the commissioner, has been participating in all of our agency advisory group discussions to this point.
Okay.
Any further comments? I have a couple of questions then. You made a comment about hoping you have enough right-of-way. You got 170 feet in your typical cross-section shown on page 9. That's quite a cross-section. Do we really need 42 feet in the middle? Do we really need a 30-foot drainage swale? Seems to me that's adding a lot of dollars to this project.
So, good question. So, a couple of things. One is that the typical section that's shown there is accommodating the 42-foot median, for example, also is not inclusive on that cross-section. It does not include the off-ramp that is included for if you're headed southbound and you want to turn left into the parking area. There's a deceleration lane that must go into that median and then turn and go into the parking area. And then likewise, when you're leaving that and you want to head southbound, you got to cross the northbound lanes get into an acceleration lane and accelerate. And so there's that median width provides space for the median. It also provides space for future expansion of the highway. As the highway exists today, and under this project, it's still only going to be one lane in each direction, and that's all that's being built, one through lane in each direction. But it is providing space in the median for not just for that future expansion, but also to provide the minimum clear zone distances without having to put guardrail up. And so that's one of the things that's also being pursued, is to try to build a road that we can build without having to put guardrail on both sides of the lanes that have become a safety issue.
It just seems to me an awfully wide expansion for two 12-foot travel lanes in a railroad track.
Yep, it is. I agree.
You pointed out that your MOA has expired, and I just was wondering what you've done, but you've answered that. On page 3 of 7 of the questions, it talks about 2 million yards of fill. That is a large number. And I think that you have a solution here with what you're trying to do. I don't know if you got the best solution. I mean, it just seems to me an awful lot of material there. And I don't know what a yard of material hauled is worth today, probably at least $10. So I'm going to say that's at least a $20 million number right there by itself. And I don't know if you go back and say, what could we do to minimize this?
So, good question. This project has been around for quite a while, and it's been through multiple iterations of coming up with various scenarios. The scenario that we're currently working with is actually a iteration of alternative 10C, if that gives you some idea of how many iterations we've been through. And there was actually a value engineering study performed on the project by the state in 2011, which also looked at various options, from everything from tunneling to narrower cross sections and all sorts of things. And frankly, the option that we have right now is what was recommended from that value engineering study. And we continue all through the process to try to make it as cost effective as a solution as we can, that balances the impacts to the arm and balances the right-of-way acquisition and without making the project so expensive that it becomes infeasible. I can just tell you that this solution that we're proposing, we believe to be the most cost-effective solution that meets the needs, the purpose and needs for the project that we've identified, and that enables the project to kind of meet the long-term vision for the Seward Highway without having to come back out there in 10 or 15 years to create space for a trail or to create space for an additional lane, and then have to move those rail or that road facility out even further to provide space for those things. And so it's really taking, it is a little bit different view. I mean, we're putting in a very large parking area on both sides and taking an area that has a lot of stop and go traffic for wildlife viewing and trying to create and separate the different activities that are occurring at this location. And that differential in speeds is what's causing a lot of the safety issues. If you map the Seward Highway on 2-mile segments between Anchorage and Seward, this 2-mile stretch over the last 40 years has the highest number of major injuries and fatalities over that 40-year period. There's no other 2-mile stretch has more of those crashes over that 40-year period. And it's because you get a lot of differential speeds between the cars that are slowing down to look at the sheep, to look at belugas, and so our project is specifically trying to target that problem of differentialing speeds, where you have all people trying to go through at 65 miles per hour to get through the corridor, and the others that are enjoying the scenery. And so separating those modes and creating a safe long-term view for this corridor is really what we're trying to accomplish.
We understand the situation. We all drive it. Yep. We understand it very well. I was involved in the Whittier Access Project, and we started to build a bridge, and we figured out we could never build the bridge, and so we built a tunnel. That first short tunnel saved the state about $10 million by being creative, and that's what you do here. One of the questions that was answered that's shown on page 3 of 7, the question was, will Gorilla Rock be impacted? I happen to know about Gorilla Rock. But so, and the answer given was no, under the current scenario, Gorilla Rock will not be impacted. And that's not how I read the drawings. I read the drawings, you're blasting right through Gorilla Rock, and it's going to be history.
Where does it say it will not be impacted?
Page 3 of 7, second to the last question.
Page 3 of 7.
It's about halfway through the book where all the questions are answered.
Well, I will look through there and see where you're looking at, but I can tell you that Gorilla Rock used to not be impacted in previous iterations, but okay, if you look at so that's a date on Monday, March 14th. Those are meeting minutes from, is that what you're looking at? Well,
it says page 3 of 7 at the bottom. Following comments and responses were captured on flip charts.
Yes. So that was an older iteration of the alignment that actually went further out into the inlet and preserved Gorilla Rock at great expense to the project, frankly, and frankly more impact to the inlet. And so as part of the VE analysis, the value engineering, the cost, making this more cost effective, those outer lanes were brought in, the rail was brought in, and Gorilla Rock will no longer be preserved. Department of Natural Resources essentially said we would prefer that Gorilla Rock go away than that you have greater impact on the inlet, and the Corps of Engineers agreed.
The railroad wanted Gorilla Rock to go away earlier.
Yes.
Trying to manage your shareholders is difficult on this project. And the railroad, I mean, I see pedestrian access and emergency access across railroad tracks throughout this land without going to the time and trouble of trying to build an underpass. And for the amount of access involved here, a gated type of access, why it not may, I know the railroad doesn't like it, but I mean, we're talking $1 million. And, you know, to me, that's an option that should absolutely be considered and not taken off the table.
Yeah, I think the project team agrees with you. Right now we're trying to figure out a way if there is a possible way to do a grade separation. So a couple of things. One is because we're building a brand new embankment, it's not a full $1 million to put a culvert in that embankment and build over the top of it. We got to build that whole new embankment anyways. So it's probably only the cost of the culvert, which is probably $300,000 or $400,000 and not $1 million. But regardless of that fact, it's still a lot of money, and we're not sure as I mentioned, from a constructability standpoint, we're not 100% sure we even have a solution that works there from a tidal and a construction from preserving the infrastructure perspective. But if let's say that we're able to make that happen, the railroad has made it very, very strongly known through our agency advisory meetings that they very much prefer and are going to be pushing for a grade separation. They've got serious trespass issues and concerns on there, and so it's not just for emergency access, it's for the general public to potentially be able to access the other side of the tracks as well. And so there's kind of the combined purpose there.
I believe they have an easement, not an exclusive easement across that land, so I disagree with that point. Do we have any further questions for the speaker? Thank you very much, sir. Have a nice
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Mr. Voorhees, will you please do the consent agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, I go through each member and ask if they'd like to pull anything?
No. Just make a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Okay. If I wanted to pull an item,
We make a motion, and then we'll get to pulling an item.
sounds good to me. Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I have a second. We have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Does anyone want to pull any items here? Ms. Barker?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull item D1A, Resolution 2014-043.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to pull another item? Mr. Voorhees?
I'd like to pull item D1E, the approval of the 6-year fiscal plan.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to pull anything else? I had a note that we were going to pull D1D also. I thought somebody wasn't here for that one. So you want to, Mr. Gaines, you want to pull item D1D?
Mr. Chair, I would just abstain from voting on the consent agenda if that's okay with the
Let's pull
body.
D1D and we'll come back at it. Okay, just a minute. We'll get the rest of it done. We have pulled items D1A, D1D, and D1E. Would you use your machines to vote on the remaining items, please? Okay, the remaining items have been approved. So now we'll go back and take the resolutions individually. Ms. Barker, you pulled item D1A. Would you care to speak to that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and I would like to move adoption of 2014-043 in the revised version.
Thank you. I got to find it. Did we get a revised version today?
Yes, we did.
Okay. So you're talking about the one with the language in red, is that correct, Ms. Parker?
No, actually, there's a separate one that on the top of it says resolution number 2014-043 and parens revised. It's the top of the packet.
Okay,
The red line version is the second page in the middle in the original resolution.
I have it. Thank you very much. You're making a motion to approve. Let me go to Ms. McConnell here, then I'll come back at you. Ms. McConnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At your request, Lieutenant Gillum from the CAP team is here to answer any questions you may have, so I just wanted to introduce him.
Okay, Lieutenant, we'll
Thank
give you just 1 minute. I'd like to get this on the floor, then I saw him over there, and
Yep.
he's a little bit obvious. Ms. Barker, so you're making a motion to submit the revised agenda, a revised motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Would you hit your machine? Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Robinson. If my request, you rewrote this with 2 exceptions, I like it, but we'll see if anybody has any other comments on that. Is there anything else you would like to add to that?
All I would like to add to it is what I was attempting to do here was to reframe the issues with respect to some of the nuisance factors that were identified by the public when we were receiving the report from the Brother Francis Shelter, to basically place those issues in context and in a greater land use consideration than simply the specific use attached to the Brother Francis Shelter, and recognizing that it's part of a more global issue that has to do with a variety of co-located uses that all cater to the same population, that the issue isn't so much the specific use of the Brother Francis shelter as it is a phenomenon that's existing kind of in this general area. And so that's what I've attempted to do here, and to pull together the comments of the commission and are wanting to communicate that to the assembly.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any other comments on this? Seeing and hearing none, my only comment was I struggle with the line. I struggle with this where it says the commission finds the shelter is in conformance with the terms of the conditional use. On one hand, I agree with that comment. On the other hand, I think it's an attractive nuisance. I will be supporting the motion, though. I think it's a good motion on this. Anybody else have any further comment? Lieutenant, if you care to come forward now, sir. Thank you very much for your time. We recognize we're getting you away from your primary duty here, but we appreciate it.
It's not a problem. I'm happy to respond.
Mr. Strike, you had a couple questions.
I do. And this kind of goes back in history to the conversations we've had, and when we've asked about the nuisance calls and the number of calls, we will put forth questions as to how many calls has Brother Francis had. We've had testimony before on this topic, and then they'll come back and say, well, that was Beans Cafe. And then when you talk to Beans Cafe, they'll say, no, that was Brother Francis. I'd like to make a statement that when I look at both of these, they're one and the same. They're co-located. They're adjacent, co-located operational facilities. And I guess I'm looking to you. Is that conclusion a fair conclusion on my part, or should I readjust my thinking?
Mr. Strike, through the chair, I've been an Anchorage police officer for over 31, almost 32 years. And to give you some historical facts about that and maybe help you understand some of those issues, and to answer your question, yes, it is a co-location. The problems are mixed and one and the same. You're dealing with the same groups of individuals. And when the Anchorage Police Department responds to those locations, it's almost, we get one location. And it's 1021 East 3rd Avenue. And when we go there, it might be that you're looking to the left to deal with the issue or turning to the right to deal with the issue. So, yes.
Depending on the time of day?
Perhaps. What we have seen, and if you would like, I could probably give you a 5 or 6 minute answer to that question, or...
No, let's keep it on
okay.
topic here and so forth. My line of questioning is based on the testimony we've had in the past. I have heard numbers of 900 plus police calls to this site, facility, address, location.
Mr. Strike, through the chair, that is probably very accurate. The Anchorage Police Department responds there 2 or 3 times a day.
And then 3 weeks ago, I read in the newspaper that Walmart is being subject to fines because you're responding there 60 times year to date.
Well, what the article didn't, I'm sorry, Mr. Strike, through the chair, what the article didn't say is we've actually been there over 800 times. Those are 80 qualifying calls under the AMC-80 code. So yes, we are there a lot.
And typically for the same reason?
Primarily, yes. It's usually the chronic inebriates and the related calls for service.
Are we going to treat Walmart the same as Brother Francis and Beans Cafe, or vice versa? Are we going to start fining Beans Cafe and Brother Francis for the number of calls they're receiving?
No, the Beans Cafe and Brother Francis are exempt under AMC 880. They are a charity and they are exempt.
And by the mere fact that they're a charity gives them that exemption, or was that exemption called out specifically for that facility?
Because they're a charity. Any charity that does, there's actually like a 501c, any of those individuals that deal with public inebriates or chronic inebriates or any other issues, we do not count those calls for service. They are exempt under the code.
Walmart might try to argue that they're one too.
Well, if they were a 501c, I would suspect they would be, but that's not the case. They're for profit.
There is the loophole.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily classify as a loophole. That's a business. They're trying to make money, And the Brother Francis and Beans, while we do have issues there, they do form a huge public safety issue. If those individuals, and we're talking hundreds of individuals, don't have that location to go to, they're going to be in our neighborhoods. And so they do serve a purpose. It's just unfortunate for the neighbors that are surrounding it. I mean, Mr. Oliva and I, I've been working on this problem since 2008. And it is a very complex social issue. There are no easy solutions to this. There are some things that I think we could do better. There are some things that, in fact, I'm working with Catholic Social Services, Brother Francis and Beans, to try to fence that, to separate them, because not all of the individuals that are around that area are clients of Beans and they're there for the social reasons. They're there for to get the alcohol or spice or whatever else that they're doing.
I think you hit it right on. The next topic is you have some ideas that you see could be solutions. Are those being conveyed? Are you receiving an audience on your ideas? I mean, you're living it every day. You're seeing it every day. Because my first question before you made the comment was, you're king for a day. What would you change?
Well, a couple of things that I would do, and to answer your question, yes, I'm working with an ad hoc subcommittee of the Assembly. We just met last month. We've had a number of. There has been a homeless task force assigned from the municipality of Anchorage for a number of years. This problem has been studied. There are a couple of circumstances that enable this problem to continue. If I were a king for a day, there are certain things that I would address. One is I would not provide services for people that continue to violate the law or create problems for neighboring individuals or businesses. We have identified individuals that are manipulating, for lack of a better word, the system. They know that if they know when they can get the services, they know where to go to get the services, they know where to go to get the alcohol, and they're going to drink to the point that then we have to go back and pick them up. To give you some numbers, the Anchorage Police Department and the CSP, their AESP, the safety patrols, pick up about 3,000 plus individuals annually and transport them because they're too intoxicated to take care of themselves. Of those 3,000 plus, roughly half of those we only pick up maybe once or twice a year. Either they're visitors here or for what other circumstances. When you start digging deeper into that numbers of individuals, there are roughly 200 individuals in our city that we pick up sometimes daily. Some of these individuals we pick up twice a day. And if we could focus on those individuals, I would like to see our Title 47 statute strengthened to allow us to involuntarily commit people like this, that they cannot take care of themselves for whatever reason, whether it's mental illness or a drug and alcohol addiction to the point where they are a public safety problem. If we could focus on that group of people, we could save millions of dollars.
Are you seeing an audience for your suggestions?
You know, it's being talked about. It's being talked about more now than it was earlier. There are some different demographic issues that people like to tread around lightly. There are social organizations here that believe that individuals may not have the capacity to make their own decisions. I happen to believe that many of these individuals are capable because we see manipulative behavior.
You're before the Planning and Zoning Commission here, and it's the proverbial, we see an issue, we want to address an issue, we like to think that we can fix an issue, we understand our hands are tied. Mm-hmm. You're out in the street every day, you're living it, you're seeing it, you've been a police officer for 30 plus years, you've worked this situation, what I hear, since 2008?
2008.
Okay. How can we help you?
I don't know if you're in the position to make some of these changes. I'm asking for better education for our citizens because panhandling is a huge problem in the city. if the citizens would not give these individuals money at intersections, it would dry up that resource. A panhandler today will admit to you that they can get anywhere from $50 to $150 a day panhandling. You know, some of these individuals have better discretionary funds than you and I. You know, my wife won't allow me $150 a day to go do what I want, you know, so, yes, it is a problem. There are things that we could do better. I would like our citizens to donate. If you're going to give to these individuals, give to the charities. They are in a better position to give the money and resources to those individuals that are truly in need. I will share with you that when we're dealing with some of the illegal campers, because the CAP team is one of the sections I command. I'm the acting division commander for our crime suppression division. They have gone into locations where illegal camps along our parks, and these parks are trashed. And there are many of these individuals actually have residences here in Alaska, some of them even here in Anchorage, and they're there to party. That's what they're wanting to do and stuff. So it's difficult, you know, I mean, we have a heart. We're not heartless. We care about people that are in need, but by the same token, we have a fair number, and it's a growing number of individuals that are abusing the system. And I'd like to focus on those.
I want to thank you for, there may be some other questions, but I'm smarter on this topic today because you came and spoke to us.
Thank you, Mr. Strike.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the Lieutenant? Ms. McConnell, could we maybe 3 or 4 months from now ask the Lieutenant back? We may be in a better position. We will have some elections behind us by then, and we might be in a better position. I think we are in agreement with each other. I think Commissioner Strike is right. I think we're more informed now. We all see the same problem, and we'd like to get it resolved on that. So, thank you.
Mr. Hare, I'd be happy to return.
And I'd like to add, again, we're the Planning and Zoning Commission, and so in some regards our hands are tied, but as I mentioned in an earlier comment, we're not as political, so we're not afraid to ask some of the questions that you may not want to ask some of your superiors. I'll ask. You got a question you're getting rebuffed on or that you're having difficulty, I'll ask it.
Well, I appreciate that.
And we'll
Okay.
go push it. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, sir. Do we have any further questions on Resolution 2014-043? We have a motion. We have a second. Can we vote, please? Thank you. Use your machine. That motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item is 2014 D1D. This was a reconsideration of a monopole. I think we have Ms. Barker and Mr. Kange were absent, so if you want to excuse yourselves, but don't go too far. Can they stay? Okay. Thank you. All right. On that, can I have a motion, if there's no further discussion on case 2014-0138, Commissioner Strike?
Yeah, just to clarify, this was the approval of our rejection of the rehearing.
This was the denial of the request by the applicant for a rehearing.
Correct.
I've said it slightly different than you did on that one.
But I understood what I said.
The lieutenant mentions he picks up some people twice a day on that one. Do we have any other further questions on D1D? Any objections? Seeing and hearing none, case 21D is approved. Case D1E, 2015-2020 6-year physical program. I think somebody was absent here. Who was that? You, Mr. Kange, or who was absent? Why did we pull it?
I'd like to make a comment on it.
Okay, fine. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that maybe I'll direct this question both to the incoming CFO and then also maybe to the staff. And the question is, looking at the capital improvement budget and program, I'm just kind of asking, and maybe to the CFO first, does it follow or been laid against or compared to the 2020 Anchorage Comp Plan, as it kind of lays out the financial resources for the next 6 years? And maybe you can answer it the best you can, just kind of coming in the door.
Through the chair, I know that we did not look at that when we were finalizing it.
Thank you for your answer. Maybe if we could maybe, I don't know if the discussion's really necessary, but to,
we're bound, we're here to, this is on the consent agenda. We discussed it and passed it last week.
I agree.
So it's not, I mean, if something is stated improperly, here we can take that up, but I don't think it's appropriate to re-argue the case.
No, I'm not re-arguing it. Thank you for your clarification. I'm not really re-arguing it, I guess, that's a kind of preliminary question to my follow-up question, but it seems that since this is where the financial resources go, that it, in where kind of it's guiding the city for the next 6 years, that it should be maybe suggested or looked at in comparison with the 2020 plan to kind of stay on the rails with that plan. That would be, I just want to make sure I was on the record to say that. And I guess to the staff, with no disrespect, again, just besides it's required, why is this body reviewing this plan, the budget? You know, it doesn't really seem like we really have a horse in the race on this. We cannot make any changes. You know, we can make suggestions to it, but to say if we wanted to put a bicycle trail or a pedestrian trail somewhere, I just really don't see why this body's reviewing it. The only people that can really amend or change this plan, or the budget, as I understand it, is the assembly or the mayor. And so I was just trying to maybe get a little clarification on that.
Through the chair. Commissioner, so the reason you're being asked to consider the fiscal program, the six-year fiscal program, is because that's required by the charter. So, and there is the provision under the charter that the planning and zoning can make recommendations. So that in a nutshell is where that's coming from.
Yeah, thank you very much. So basically it's just from the charter, if I understand you correctly, but as far as really beyond recommendations, there's really no other decision-making ability that this body has, correct?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Thank you very much.
Just as a heads up, the school district, we have the same issue. We get a budget from the school district, we review it, but we're not given the authority to approve it or change it. We may make recommendations. And I understand, you know, I don't really know why it comes to us, but just be aware that there's other budgets coming to it. Ms. Barker?
Mr. Chairman, I regret the error of doing the disclosures. I was also not present for this item. I missed last week's meeting.
Okay, please don't vote when that comes around.
Sir.
Commissioner Kange?
Thank you, through the chair. Just as maybe a clarification, the suggestion I had at last week's meeting was that the municipality utilize the Budget Advisory Commission earlier on in the process. So item number 4, I don't know if that's a typo or wasn't included, but it says Planning and Zoning Commission should be included. And our request, I believe, was to get these documents early, as in outlined in items or in item 6, I guess. So maybe it's just a typo or it wasn't included.
So,
I'm not sure.
Paragraph 4, you think should read Budget Advisory Commission?
Yes, sir.
I believe that was your testimony.
Sorry, I didn't catch that earlier. Also, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes?
If I may, through the chair. So, Commissioner, if you look at item 1 under the findings, that does address the Budget Advisory Commission.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So I think that covers it.
Yep, that could. Thank you.
So you don't have a change on 4 any longer? Thank you very much. Commissioner Strike?
Yes, like Ms. Barker, on this item, I was not present last week, so I will not be voting.
Okay, so we have Strike and Barker out. Is there anybody else out on this item? We still have a quorum on this item. We have a motion by Commissioner Kange. Do I have a second? Mr. Robinson, can we, if no further comments, may we please use our machines? That motion carries on that. It was one of the more complex consent agendas we've had in a while. Okay. For the audience's information, we have 2 more items, and then we'll get to case 2014-0119, which I'm guessing most of you are here for. I would say that's 30 or 40 minutes away from now, so we're making good progress on that. The next item is case 2014-0071, Government Hill. The public hearing is closed on this item. I do not know if staff has any comments to make on this item. If so, go ahead, staff, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. So the staff report prepared for this case includes proposed amendments to the Government Hill Neighborhood Plan and several updates to the commercial core scenarios. Just for the record, please note that the Planning and Zoning Commission was forwarded a revised staff report dated October 9th, 2014, which reflected several corrections to the chronology that's found on page 2 of the staff report. And apologize for any confusion that may have caused.
I appreciate the way you've noted that it was revised. That's very acceptable. It's very clear, and it helps the confusion up here. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, following directions given by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Government Hill Planning Committee and staff have reviewed and revised the neighborhood core scenarios from 3 to 2 and presented these to the Commission over the course of several work sessions. The Commission has been reviewing and providing comment and feedback on the 2 commercial core scenarios over the course of the past 8 months. Staff and the Government Hill Planning Committee have made a good faith effort to respond to your questions and requests for additional clarification from the Commission during this time frame. Staff provided clarification on what is in place today to guide development and how the 2 core scenarios will be triggered in the future for use by members of the development community and representatives from the Government Hill Community Council. I know there's at least one member of the Government Hill Community Council who's served on the Planning Committee, who's in attendance tonight to demonstrate their support for the core scenarios. And although the public hearing is closed, representatives from the Community Council want the Planning and Zoning Commission to know that they strongly support their adoption. They are anxious for these scenarios to be approved so that there is clear direction on how this neighborhood core develops regardless of the KAC. In summary, staff recommends approval of several amendments to the GHNP as well as the technical edits to the core scenarios. The amendments and technical edits are noted on pages 3 and 4 of the staff report. And briefly, those amendments include several land use plan map fixes that were missed in 2013 and an updated narrative for the scenario description. And those amendments are more fully described in the staff report. So in closing, staff recommends approval of case 2014-71, and I will stand for any questions from the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. And when you look at the scenario, we appreciate everyone's efforts on this thing. This thing has been kicked around long enough on that one. Commissioner Robinson?
Thank you. Through the chair to staff. Now that there are 2 scenarios from 3 to 2, and one presumes a plan with the Knickarm Crossing and one sort of not and calls it conservative moderate. What's the trigger for the municipality to begin acting? Because I note that the municipality, while again not showing up in this year's CIP/CIB, clearly has a lead role in a number of the implementation items that are noted in the plan. What would be the trigger to know that you're working on either scenario A or scenario B in terms of infrastructure planning, assembling of parcels? You know, how does this plan become a reality, and what reality is it?
Carol Wong for the Planning Division. I would say that for scenario A, for the moderate one, that the trigger there would be beginning work with the community there on the overlay district. That would begin that process, and once that overlay was in place, we would definitely be working on that scenario. That scenario would also be coupled with, again, some improvements for pedestrian safety, especially connecting the east neighborhoods over to Government Hill Elementary School. That was proposed this year in the CIP, but did not make it through the nomination process. As for the KAC scenario, that would kick into place when we find that they have secured funding for the project at the federal level for a loan for that project, but to date we have not heard whether that has happened.
So just to be clear then, you would begin working on scenario A moving forward, and the planning department would have in your work program, you know, items associated with moving these items forward as soon as next year? Is that?
Again, through the chair, we don't have the overlay district identified for 2015. We've put it out in a future year. We have other projects that we would like to work on next year, namely a lot of Title 21 amendments.
So, and just final question, an overlay district in my mind is a zoning overlay. A lot of the items here have to do with, you know, infrastructure, investment, a lot of that really may or may not have to do with zoning. So how do those items move forward?
Those items would be moved forward through, again, some could be through the community council nominating those projects to be considered through the CIP process. They could also, because the parts of that community meet some criteria for economically depressed, they could apply for grants to assist in paying for some of those projects as well. So there's a number of things that the community could move forward in trying to find funding. But again, absent an approved scenario, it's kind of hard to have something they can go to these bodies with to say, this is something we've moved forward on that's been approved by the city, and so it has that backing.
Just a comment from Melinda. I think take the approach that the downtown partnership uses when they approach kind of review of CIP, capital improvement planning, and I would sort of just say Government Hill plan means that we're going to do this and keep arguing, and maybe at some point we'll get 6-year funding that actually lists some of these items here, and then we can talk about prioritizing them or not. But to be able to get from here to there, and if you stick around for that conversation, you'll notice the gap. That's the one I think we're concerned about. Thank you.
Any further questions? I have a couple questions. First, we were criticized, and maybe correctly so, on Title 21 by proceeding with 2 plans for another year. We're increasing the workload on planning and zoning. Are we creating the same problem with scenario A and scenario B? I mean, we're asking you to continue forward under 2 plans for an indefinite period. Is that going to be more difficult?
Mr. Chairman, In my opinion, no, I don't believe so. The Government Hill Neighborhood Plan, as you know, was adopted in 2013 with the three scenarios. We've now, over the past 8 months, narrowed that down to 2, and obviously one of those scenarios is contingent upon a very large transportation project that may or may not happen. And so in the interim, there is another scenario that the Community Council and the department can proceed with.
Looking at Commissioner Robinson's question, I would say A is triggered now, and B would get triggered if and when KAC goes ahead. Is that a fair statement?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that's a fair statement.
Does anyone else have any further questions on this issue? We've only had it up here 8 times. We have a motion, Mr. Robinson.
Yes, sir. I move that in the matter of case 2014-71, long-range planning recommendation for an amendment to the Government Hill Neighborhood Plan commercial core scenarios, I move that we recommend Assembly adoption.
Mr. Gaines, you second that motion? Do we have any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to say that I'll be supporting the motion. I did want to, I think what we're attempting to do, while there still are 2 scenarios, is narrow down the alternatives and try to give some clearer direction of this document. I still think that there's some work that needs to be done in terms of laying out how things would move forward in Government Hill, and I trust that would be tasks served by the working groups that would work on this moving forward. I also want to read one section of the plan on page 3, and while this is addressing the 3 scenarios, originally I think it's still relevant to the 2. It says, while these scenarios provide visual options for redevelopment of the commercial core, they are not specific development site plans slated for construction. I think it's important that we look at these scenarios not as specific building layouts, specific uses, and that development could occur in a whole lot of different ways, but that it's an example of the vision and how that core could be developed. And I don't want us to get boxed in by these scenarios with different petitions or entitlement applications. I think we need to consider what they are and what they are not. So with that, I'll be supporting the motion.
Anyone else have any further comment? I will be supporting the motion also. I think it's been well discussed up here. We looked at this many times. I think its time has come and it should be passed. We have a motion. We have a second. Can we please vote? That motion carries unanimously. Congratulations. Thank you, everybody. Pardon? I voted. Well, okay, I voted on that one. That takes care of case 2014-0163. Nope, wrong case. That takes case 2014-0071. Our next case is 2014-0163, the annual capital improvement budget and capital improvement program. We had a work session on this earlier this evening. Staff have any comments at this time?
Yes, just a brief statement, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, staff has received and forwarded to you a copy of the proposed fiscal year 15 CIP as well as the 2015-2020 capital improvement program. As you know, staff received this document on October 2nd, 2014. The Office of Management and Budget prepared these documents, and pursuant to Anchorage Municipal Code, the Commission is being asked tonight to review and make recommendations on the proposed capital projects to the Assembly. In response to comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission last year regarding these same documents that were prepared, staff attempted to identify a number of projects that relate to implementation of various land use plans. However, due to the short time frame, we have not had the time that we would like to fully analyze these projects beyond some basic identification of the capital projects and the respective land use plans. Notwithstanding that, staff does recommend approval of the proposed FY15 CIB and the capital improvement program. As you know, the CFO, Kate Gerard, is here tonight and can probably answer more specific questions if you have those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gerard. Do you care to comment?
Mr. Chairman, I have a list of items from the work session that we will be getting back with you on, as well as your recommendations of the body to improve the process and to make the document more of a living document. Beyond that, I thank you for your comments in the work session.
On the items to get back to us, I would like a count of the fire apparatus that's sitting in the training center, an approximate value of those, if I could. Commissioner Robinson, then Commissioner Spring.
Mr. Chair, I had a couple of other comments, but I wondered if we could ask Mr. Gerard to read those items into the record so we're clear on what they are and they're reflected. I don't believe we take record on the work session.
That's correct. Can you summarize those items, Mr. Gerard, first, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I did write down the number of items that we were going to get back to you, and we can be corrected. Number one is in the overview. It would be helpful for the body if it had a sense of how the municipality did last year in terms of its funding methods. So that would go roughly on page 8, where we show historical awards. We would also provide a summary of the requests that we had made and the basis for the awards. There are no cross-references within the book to the details in the back of the book. We would also be providing in the future some kind of cross-reference or identification to the AMATs or other planning documents where these improvements were recommended for better clarity. I am to get back with you as to how Whitney Road, 92nd, and Elmore Road at Abbott and O'Malley ended up in the plan when they're not part of the approved AMATs transportation plan. And I have your fire apparatuses. That is my list that I compiled.
Any commissioners have any items missing? Mr. Robinson.
Well, I think this is as much a comment to staff. I can appreciate the lack, not having sufficient time to review the document. Given that it's a 6-year plan, consider this a head start on next year already, given that there's 5 years out. And I think while the exercise of showing how these items are represented in our planning documents is certainly one part of the exercise, the other exercise is what all those recommendations are, whether or not they end up in this plan, so you know with the ones that aren't getting into the document. And that would be something that be as much, I think, fall on the shoulders of planning staff to kind of figure those ones out, or working with your separate planning area teams and those sorts of things. So it's got to be both sides, but as we heard from Mr. Sporhays earlier, we need to see really clear linkages to those documents, and I think ultimately that'll make us better on the adoption of those plans as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. You got a motion, Mr. Spring?
I have a comment. And then a motion.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
You don't mind? Yes, I'd just like to thank staff for making an effort anyway to review the CIP in relationship to the plans. I know you tried. You didn't have much time, but I found your memo helpful. I'd just encourage you to continue that direction. Hopefully, you have more time next year. But perhaps it also might be useful to get the help of the transportation planning section. I don't think that they probably provided. I see that there's a gap there, although you did mention some transportation-related projects. I think if transportation planning helped you out, it would be a lot quicker for them to identify projects that are consistent with the transportation plan rather than you trying to do it. But anyway, just to continue that direction. And I do have a motion.
Okay, just let's get with some comments done. Mr. Robinson?
Sorry, I had one more. I had a specific project that I didn't mention during the work session, but there are two projects recommended for Spenard Road, and Spenard Road is has been a long-studied road, especially the area north of Benson to Hillcrest. So the plan calls for Spenard Road reconstruction of Hillcrest to Benson Boulevard, and budget's, I think, $3.5 million. There's been an assembly committee formed on that road. There's been a lot of involvement. It's controversial, but I believe that there's been some efforts made to find some compromise. In addition to that section, there's a section from Benson to 36th, and I note what's planned there is surface rehabilitation. And I guess what I would note is the same problems that are identified in the first section that leads to the plan being reconstruction of the road exist in that second portion of the road, and I would argue actually to an even greater degree. There's a curve in the road. There's even narrower sidewalks. They often don't exist at all. And I think you need to look closely as to how, on the one hand, you can call for reconstruction, and the other hand, surface rehab, which to me really indicates that you're not changing the functional needs of that road. And how that happens, despite the fact that we have this area called out in the West Anchorage District Plan. We have, I believe, a budget to do Spenard area road planning in the planning department's budget next year, and I believe it's transportation funding that's funding it. So I'm glad to see it in those out years, but I suspect if we really thought long and hard, it's not surface rehab that's needed. It's something more significant. Thank you.
Mr. Cecil?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And before the body makes a final motion, I just wanted to add on a couple of items that I would like to, that is what I believe I heard you ask for in terms of going forward next year. And that was, you mentioned about the fire trucks, the bonding clarification, and how the bonding is split among the departments. We have the three projects that Commissioner Spring mentioned. What I heard Commissioner Barker say is that there needs to be further clarification on the linkages between the plans, and I think all of you have mentioned that tonight, and also about the prioritization of projects. Let's see. Now, Commissioner Strike had some specific questions, and I'll have to apologize because I'm not familiar with these particular projects, but PW5, the football stadium concessions and the golf course, and maybe that's just a clarification that's needed, but we can do that. And then I think last but not least, the chair's comments about consistency and prioritization. So I think that hopefully I haven't missed anything, and that complements what Ms. Gerard has given you as well.
I'd like to add one more item. In August of next year, would planning staff please remind the chair that this is coming up, and so the chair can get a hold of the appropriate people? And we won't let them, we're not going to let OMB drive this boat on that one. Okay. Mr. Robinson, you have a motion.
I do, sir. In the matter of case 2014-0163, review and recommendation to the Assembly regarding the annual capital improvement budget and 6-year capital improvement program in accordance with AMC 2110-015A6. I move that we recommend approval to the Assembly, noting the additional suggestions and requests that were outlined in the work session and here during deliberations.
Mr. Sporhees, you second it?
I do, thank you. And would it be possible to make the comments on the consent agenda part of this?
Yes.
Thank you.
Would you reiterate those comments, please?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. Thank you. I guess the first comment was just the question that was asked: is this capital improvement budget and program follow or been compared to the 2020 acreage comp plan? And if not, could future fiscal budgeting kind of circle back to the plan to make sure that we're doing the work of the people and following the approved plan? And then maybe a sidebar would be, besides the charter, as it is today, it really doesn't make sense, and we don't have a horse in the race to be looking at this plan, as there's really nothing we can do besides a couple of recommendations to the Assembly.
Are you okay with that, Mr. Robinson?
Yes, sir.
Any comments on this motion? Commissioner Spring?
Well, I guess I disagree with Commissioner Sporres in some respect. I don't think it's a matter of that we don't have a horse in the race. I think it's a matter that we aren't really given the authority to really follow through with our recommendations. I mean, is it really worth our time to sit up here and make a recommendation? We haven't seen a lot of action from it, but I'm encouraged by the response from the fiscal officer and the planning departments, and I'm hoping that it improves, that we have more input in the next year maybe, and we have more solid reason for being here. And we do have the horse in the race, I think, is the project list that is proposed, and project list should, as you say, follow the plans that are adopted and recommended, of course, by the Planning Commission. So I think we have a role. Whether or not our role is, is followed through and our recommendations are followed through is another issue altogether. But I guess I disagree, and I think we should continue at least reviewing the CIP. Hopefully we'll have more time to do it more thoroughly next time.
Commissioner Sporres?
It's a good thing we're not in a debate, because it sounded like you agreed. But anyhow, I do agree with Commissioner Spring that should we go forth with the recommendations that the body has made, I think that there will be a more applicable role for the Planning and Zoning Commission, kind of as other in past planning and zoning commissions have done, maybe in past plans to kind of keep us all on track. So in short, I agree and also disagree with Mr. Spring.
Ms. Barker?
Just wanted to add the comment that the capital improvements program, capital improvements budget are one of the principal tools for implementing the comprehensive plan. And therefore, it just begs that we have that connectivity better outlined. And again, hope that staff will have more lead time to continue the yeoman's effort that they started with this iteration, so that next year we have a much better understanding of where that clear connection is.
I will not be supporting Mr. Robinson's motion. We forwarded it last year with no recommendation. And I believe because of the time allowed here, we should forward it again with no recommendation. I like the issues that we stated last year better on that one, so I will not be supporting the motion. Seeing no further discussion in the queue, can we please vote? That motion carries 5-3. So, Mr. Robinson, your motion passed. Mr. Robinson, do you have any findings?
No, I believe the findings that I heard were sufficient.
Mr. Sporres?
I'm in agreement with Mr. Robinson.
Any further commissioners?
Through the chair, real quick, I just wanted to echo staff's comment in there that, and I think we can all agree that more time on this would be better.
I totally agree. That completes action on case 2014-0163. The next item is 2014-0119, We will take about a 6-minute recess, please. We've been here since 5:30, people, and we know you want to testify and we want to hear you, but we're going to take about a 6-minute recess. We'll come back. We'll have a staff report. The applicant will have some time, and then we'll take public hearing. We will probably be in public hearing by 8:15 or 8:20. I'm trying to keep you posted. Thank you very much. We will now take a 6-minute recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one item of note before I begin. Late comments received. That is item number G1, and I apologize that the full 11x7 construction drawings were not placed in your original packets. As that size, it's easier to refer to the electrical and antenna attachments. Mr. Chair, this is a request for final conditional use approval for a 78-foot wireless communications tower, not to exceed 79 feet. The application requesting a conditional use approval is GCI doing business as Alaska Wireless Network with representation by Marsh Creek. The proposed tower is to be located in the South Addition area, specifically located within the alley right-of-way, northwest corner of 13th Avenue and East Street. A site plan for the proposed project can be found on page 34 of your staff packet. This tower will utilize and extend an existing 68-foot municipal light and power utility pole to locate cellular communications antennas for a total height of 78 feet, not to exceed 79 feet. The tower requires conditional use approval because this tower lacks co-location and exceeds the permitted height in the R2M district, which is 65 feet. Additionally, this tower does not have the required protective separation distance from residences in the area. However, Title 21 allows for the administrative official to reduce or eliminate the separation requirements after giving consideration to the comments of the applicant, the property owner, and the local community council. Obtaining a waiver from separation in this particular case is a condition of approval, and both motions must pass for the tower to be permitted. The department finds that the proposed tower meets the requirements of Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 21, Chapter 45, 50, 2020, and Chapter 50.280. The department recognizes the need for advanced technology and the proposed use in the area. For the reasons stated in the analysis found in the staff packet, this is an appropriate location. The use of the existing utility pole to locate cellular antennas will be less of a visible impact than that of a new local interest tower. With that being said, the department recommends approval of conditional use to allow a monopole tower not to exceed 79 feet in height and a waiver for separation from protected land uses in the R2M district, generally located within the alley right-of-way at the northwest corner of 13th and East Street, with conditions found on page 10 and 11 of the staff packet. Thank you.
I do, and thank you for giving us the additional schematics. Now, my question is, I guess, I'm assuming we need to specify what we're approving in this conditional use, right?
Correct.
Will we be adding some conditions of approval, citing these plans so that everyone knows what we're approving, in addition to the site plan, which was included in the original packet? That was not specified in the conditions either.
Through the chair, since this is final conditional use approval, the 11x17 attached record drawings will be for construction, so you'll be approving that. As stated, it's a 10-foot extension to the existing utility pole. If you look, there's a what they're calling basically it's an open cabinet where their electrical data and cellular will be attached with the leased church area. And then the two other construction drawings there show the actual attachment to the pole. That is correct. It's not an enclosed cabinet. It's kind of they're calling it an H panel, and that is page E102, and you can see it there. That is going to be a 5 by 8 foot leased area from the church. And it appears to stick out 2 feet from the wall, and it's their smaller cellular equipment. Usually you see a large box or associated equipment on the larger antennas.
One other question. If I
Go
may.
ahead.
There was a comment I read on one of the comments in the public comments involved the possibility of undergrounding utility poles along that corridor. I don't know if it was a priority of the community council to underground this particular set of poles, but do you have any information about the status of that request and whether or not that is in the queue as far as the undergrounding?
Again, through the chair, that is a good question. That was asked by many of the public, and I had asked them to contact Municipal Light and Power, and one person brought back to me that they had contacted them, and there had been no. They didn't give me a definitive answer. They said there was no plan to underground those transmission lines. However, they thought that was in some sort of 10-year plan. Staff did not contact Municipal Light and Power to find out what their underground schedule is for their main transmission lines.
Mr. Strike?
Yes, this is a question for the staff. My question is, do we have a complete packet in which to proceed with this evening's course of action based on the conversation we had at the break?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, I understand that you have a concern that the Alaska District Church of the Nazarene has not submitted a letter stating that they authorize Marsh Creek to represent them. Is that correct?
Correct.
In my opinion, the purpose of the letters of authorization are to ensure that property owners are not having approvals or applications for approvals placed on their property without their knowledge. And I would put forth that the letter on page 29, which is a letter from the Church of the Nazarene stating that Marsh Creek is authorized to install their equipment on the property, on the church property, and the lease document that is included starting on page 84 is an indication that the church has given the permission to this to Marsh Creek and to GCI to locate their equipment on the property. If the commission finds that that is not sufficient,
I find that analysis correct, but what I don't find is that Marsh Creek is authorized to represent them in this evening's meeting.
if the commission feels that the packet is insufficient, then it's the commission's authority to postpone the case.
This has come up before. This is the third instance that we've had where we've not had proper authorizations, or apparently in the packets. So, okay.
Mr. Robinson, do you have
two questions to staff, sir. In the event that if we accept that the tower is extended and approve that here tonight as a conditional use permit, and later the lines are scheduled for undergrounding, can there be a condition that the tower goes away at that point? Or have we then granted the conditional use in perpetuity?
Through the chair, Mr. Robinson, the commission is free to place a condition on this case that the conditional use is for a tower to be added or an antenna to be added to a power pole, and should the power pole be removed due to undergrounding of the lines, that the conditional use becomes null and void.
Thank you.
Is the applicant present here tonight? Would you please come forward? And hang on 1 second. I get kicked again. After the staff presentation is completed on public hearings, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow time limits established in the commission rules of procedure. Petitioners, including all of his and her representatives, are 10 minutes, and part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representative groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., get 5 minutes, Individuals get 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. Any individual may have appeal rights relating to the action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after the Planning and Zoning's final decision. Question to staff, that wording has changed. There was a line left out. It used to say, except for recommendations to the Assembly which are non-appealable. Any individual may request written findings from any commission within 7 days. There's a little light up here in front of me that changes colors here, and when it changes to yellow when you have 1 minute left, just to help people that don't testify on that. Okay, sir, will you please give your name and spell it for the record?
My name is Nick Miller, Nickmiller. I am the Director of Wireless Initiatives and Implementations for GCI, and we have applied for this permit to install a 10-foot extension on an existing utility pole. We believe that's the best way to bring service to the neighborhood without actually having to construct a new telecommunications tower. I am here really to answer any questions you have. I think that we've submitted a very good packet with a lot of good data. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer those.
Mr. Robinson, I don't know if I missed you or if you, Mr. Robinson.
Question for you. I think one of the comments mentions a number of taller buildings located in downtown. Can you speak to whether towers located, say, I don't know, 6, 8 blocks to the north on the top of multi-story buildings would not be sufficient to serve the neighborhood or address the needs that you're trying to address with this tower?
We actually have sites actually installed, as an example, one on JCPenney parking garage, not too far north. We actually have one of these. We call these small cells. We actually also have one installed on the Pioneer building. So what we're actually doing, what the technology is doing for us, is they're causing us to build more sites at a much lower height and much closer together. You know, in the front of the packet, you'll see where we kind of went through a technology where we've gone in the last 20 years. And 20 years ago, when I came to MacTel, I actually started working for MacTel. We had 3 or 4 sites that covered all of Anchorage. You know, they were very high power. The cell phones were 3 watts. So, you know, the cell phone had the ability to reach back several miles to a cell site. You could get 10, 15, sometimes 17 miles on a handheld phone. As the technology has progressed, we've reduced the amount of radios in these sites. We've reduced the power in them, and the handsets themselves have reduced power down to about 2 milliwatts. So the technology itself is demanding that we build smaller cells at lower heights to serve more compact areas. So on one of the pages in here, it shows the other sites and their distances from the one that we're proposing here. And you'll see we have 3 or 4 sites that are, 0.33 miles, 0.40 miles, and that's on page 42 of the packet we submitted. So we have a lot of sites around the area, to be quite honest. And as time goes, we're lowering the heights of those cells and I guess making them more dense so we can provide the high data speeds and the better voice quality that our customers are demanding.
Following, if I may, Mr. Chair, following that line of logic, does this mean this is the first of many petitions that you would have in this and other residential neighborhoods in Anchorage?
I would say if there's an existing structure, like a power pole that meets the requirements, then yes, you should see more of these. GCI AWN has started deploying small cells really statewide. And obviously our first choice is to go on an existing structure of sufficient height that will provide the service we
And final question, there's a lease, just out of curiosity, there's a lease to the church, there's a lease to ML&P because it's a tower. Does the municipality derive any direct benefit given that it's located in the right-of-way?
ML&P does receive lease space for the tower, and then obviously the church does also receive compensation for us mounting our box to the side of their building.
Okay, thank you.
Question regarding underground. What would be the impact to you if we put a requirement in here that if the pole gets underground, your tower goes away?
Well, it would have an impact. Our lease does cover, with ML&P, does cover undergrounding, and it actually calls for us to remove our stuff, or we can apply to keep the pole. We've started working very closely with ML&P because we want to deploy more of these around the city, and that is our hope. We understand there's a risk. If we have to remove it, we might have to build more small cells. I'm hoping by the time that happens, our technology will change. Every time we deploy something new, the next technology, it's like a laptop, the next technology is on the drawing board already.
Yeah, I understand that. Your exposed boxes are right next to the church.
They are mounted to the church.
Okay. Can we put a requirement in there that they be painted to match the church?
We can and we will, yes.
Any further questions? You've got about 9 minutes of rebuttal on that one. So if you want to reserve that time.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. King, wait a second, please.
Thank you. Sorry, it's not quick getting to my button. There's many comments in this packet from the public opposing this project. Can you elaborate a little bit more on some of the other sites that you may have looked at that might have been a little bit more desirable and that would have been more in compliance with AMC statutes?
In this area, the only existing structures that met the requirement was that pole line. It is a residential area. We do have sites in close proximity. As I said, there's 2 within 0.33 miles of this one, several more, 0.4, 0.5 miles away, and there are not a lot of structures at this height in that area.
Thank you.
Commissioner Strike.
Yes. Based on the documents I've seen, there is no intent to co-locate any other cell phone carrier on that pole.
There is not. As you know, telephone poles aren't, they're not designed for multi-carrier. We don't want to build a new tower. Obviously, if we were, we would build a co-locatable facility. But when you're leasing on a facility that already exists, you really have to take it as it comes.
And based on how it comes, are you saying that there is no room to co-locate another site, another tower, another cell phone companies?
On that specific pole, no. Could they go to a pole next to us? Yes.
Commissioner Walker?
I suspect we're going to hear some negative comment from the public today. So before you leave and they speak, can you elaborate on what the impact of not extending this tower would be? So if you don't install this site, what would the impacts be to cellular coverage, or whatever you call it now, mobile coverage in the area?
In the packet that was given out, you'll see coverage maps of where we're trying to improve our service. And honestly, we do have customers that live there. There's a lot more customers we'd like to have. If we can improve service in that area, we're going to lose business and really be held with our arms behind our back trying to get new customers. If the phone doesn't work in your home or doesn't work well, obviously you're not going to go with that provider.
Where is the closest tower you could co-locate to?
Closest tower?
Yeah.
To be honest with you, there aren't really any towers in that area. Most of the facilities are on top of rooftops.
Okay. What is the closest rooftop antenna you could co-locate to?
The closest building of sufficient height is the Pioneer Home, and we are already on that.
All right, thank you.
facility. Yes.
Pull the mic to you a little bit more.
All right, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Spring and then Commissioner Strike.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, the comment that we received was there's another building, though, across E Street, the Wireless Center, or is it some type of communications?
There is a wire center there, yes.
Yeah, by Chugash Elementary
Yes.
School. So their proposal was to locate it there. Can you?
We could have located there, but it would have caused the construction of a new tower.
You couldn't locate it on the building?
No, the building is not, I don't know the exact height, but it is not of sufficient height to provide the service.
Commissioner Strike?
Looking at the map that you have here on page 42, there is a tower at the corner of, I believe, 15th and Gamble that's newly constructed. And I believe that probably is one of the tallest towers in the Midtown downtown area, recently in the last 10 months erected.
I would
It's the
agree.
one by the,
Right below the Aces building.
Oh, yeah.
by the dance club.
Yeah, no, after you
In
said
fact,
15
if you look at that location, there's 3 towers all within probably a baseball's throw apart. Is that tower an option?
Not for this particular, not particularly for what we're trying to cover. What happens is when you raise the antennas up, they cover too far. We're trying to, with small cell technologies and the phones, you need to get the facilities very low and very close to what you're trying to cover. If we didn't have, you know, all of these other cell sites, and we actually have one across the street at, we call it actually 15th and Gamble. It's over by on the corner there by the little shop right across from the gas station. We have a facility there. We have one on the engineering building above C Street, or not above C Street, on Gamble. So 10 years ago, this would have probably been a great site. You know, you put the antennas really high and you turn the power up, you don't have a lot of customers. In today's market and today's technology, you need to have the cell site antennas very low. And if we tried to utilize a site like this and we actually tried to mount the antennas low enough where it didn't cause interference, then we wouldn't cover probably 6 blocks towards the desired area.
Well, this is all encouraging because you're adapting to the newest technology that's out there. This is great. I applaud that. But what I'm hearing is the old towers don't work. These new lower profile towers are the move that you're going to. So my next question is, what towers are you scheduled to take down?
Sheridan will be we'll be removing the antennas off the Sheridan building at the end of the month.
Okay. What towers are you expecting to take down?
None.
Okay. So you're augmenting the new technology with the old technology.
And we're putting the new technology on the old technology as well. And what I suspect is and where I have a tower and then 5 blocks away, another carrier has a tower, and another 6 blocks away, a carrier has a tower, we will all be attaching to all of those towers with much smaller antennas at much lower height. The tower at 15th and Gamble is probably a horrible example. It's a 100 and some foot tower. The antennas are probably halfway up the tower. And I agree, that is probably not the right way to do
Well,
things.
I applaud you with the type of technology that you're looking to implement. Applaud across the board. I'd stand up and clap. It's about time. The aspect of not continuing that process throughout rather than using the towers, which I believe are an eyesore and have gone on haphazardly across the city without any real oversight. But nevertheless, this new technology that you're bringing to the table is a breath of fresh air. Leverage it. Work with the municipal light and power. Work with the city and utilities and leverage that across the board so we don't see new towers going up and we see this type of adaptation conducted.
And our plan going forward is to obviously utilize the facilities we already have constructed, but our last option is to always build a tower. If we can find something that will work of sufficient height, that is always our first choice.
Hopefully someday you'll be in here taking towers down just because you've adapted the new technology across the board.
Okay, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the public testimony is now continuing. If you want to testify on this case, please come forward. Come on, folks. You sat there that long. Let's get it. I'll close the testimony. Come on down. Move down in front. We don't charge any more for the front row seats. Go ahead, sir. Please state your name for the record and
Okay,
spell it.
thank you. My name is Carl Hild, C-A-R-L-H-I-L-D. I live at 1238 F Street. I have provided some written comment, and the emergency building across to East Street was one of the things that I had mentioned as a possibility. The other towers, I'm glad to hear those being mentioned. But I think the thing I want to focus on tonight, other than looking at some of the alternative locations like the roof of the Inlet Towers, which is higher, it may not be too high then, or some of the other commercial buildings in the area, I am concerned about the use of a telephone pole. Each of these chairs in this audience are 20 inches across. That telephone pole is 18 inches across. So it's narrower than one of these chairs, and it's already 65 feet tall. It's placed in the ground, and that area, we get a lot of wind that comes in off of that ball field and the track area down below. The pole currently has 15 lines on it. 3 of those are high power lines that we were just hearing about the possibility of having those put underground. So the pole is already pretty well loaded, and now to put something additional on top of it, I asked in my written testimony, has anyone done a structural analysis of that wooden pole? Is it possible that the additional resistance at that upper end is going to put stress at the lower end of that pole? Again, it's 18 inches in diameter. So concern being that is this possible to look at alternative sites again? I'm glad to hear that ML&P is involved. I'd like to know what their structural engineers say about having an additional antenna. Haven't seen the description of how big this antenna is going to be, but that this is going to add additional leverage to that stress point, which is right where that pole goes into the ground. I think the overall concern about seeing, and I think this was mentioned by a couple of the commissioners, that if this is going to be happening, you'll be seeing these types of hearings all over the city if this idea comes up, and the idea of co-locating or putting these onto commercial facilities seems to make more sense than just tagging them on the top of utility poles. Thank you very much.
Just hang tight there for a minute. Mr. Voorhees?
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Hild. So if I kind of synopsis of your testimony, other than the structural concern of the poles, no objection, is that correct?
I think having the additional service is new technology. I think this is of interest. You know, I happen to have a house that looks right out past that pole, so there's a view shed issue, but I also realize that there are other things on my view shed. For example, the telephone poles that are already there that had to have a special permit to go to that height. It would be nice if they weren't there. This is going to go 10 foot up, which means I'm probably going to see this one too. Right now it's partially hidden behind a pine tree across the street, but you know, this 10-foot extension, I'll probably be able to see it as well.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a copy of your report, or your written testimony in our report also.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Will the next person please come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Don Mitchell, M-I-T-C-H-E-L-L. I've lived in the South Addition, depending upon how you want to start counting, either from the late 70s or the beginning of the late 80s. And I've watched this issue bubble around the neighborhood over the past couple weeks, and I think it raises some interesting policy questions that some of you touched on earlier in your discussion. There is no one who is over 12 years old in the South Addition who doesn't own a cell phone. And so obviously the technology that makes that convenience possible is something that people have to absorb as the cost of doing business. And so the question really becomes not whether we need additional towers, but whether or not this particular tower at this particular location in this particular neighborhood is an appropriate situation. What I got from listening to the presentation from the proponent of all of this was that there was one thing that was not discussed, which was money. GCI has come in here, they have this plan, they control the technology. I cannot debate them on how their technology has evolved and what their requirements are. They have a total monopoly on that information. But no one has really asked, well, could you move that tower over onto the top of that building on East Street, but it would cost? You know, who is to absorb this? The neighborhood, which would really like to get those power poles out of there to begin with, or should GCI be inconvenienced? Needless to say, living in the neighborhood, I vote for GCI. But that has not been discussed at all as to what is going on here. You discussed earlier with the representative from the police department why it is that Beans Cafe gets a pass, but Walmart doesn't. Walmart doesn't get a pass. Why? Because it is a multi-billion-dollar business. GCI is a multi-billion-dollar business. And you have not had any information from them about what they really could do if they wanted to. Now, in conclusion, I would like to say that the biggest mistake that I had and others was a failure of imagination during Project 80s. When Vic Fisher was our state senator, we could have buried all those poles down there for $100 million, and that would have got lost in traffic. Those days, sadly, are over. Those poles will not be buried probably in what's left of my lifetime, but you never know. And we shouldn't start down the slippery slope of letting GCI do this without the kind of economic analysis that I've suggested, and thank you for the running over.
All right, any questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, appreciate it.
We'll take your time off the next guy.
I'll go next because I'm quick. My name's Megan Kim, K-I-M. I live directly across the street. My living room window opens onto the parking lot of the church, so there's definitely a view shed issue here. This neighborhood, it's great that GCI is pursuing a lower profile, but in this specific instance, the lower profile doesn't really make sense because that is a very high-profile view. People move to this neighborhood because of the beautiful mountain views, and it also is a big commercial business with lots of bed and breakfast and tourists and that sort of thing. So I think that it's great that towers are smaller, but it doesn't really matter in this case because it's going to be a pretty big visual impact. It's just out of the character, and I think that, like Don said, if they spent a little more money, they could do it somewhere else, but they're probably doing it cheaper and inconveniencing us instead. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. She made up for you. You're good. Next person.
Good evening. My name is, excuse me, Mike Bowman, B-O-W-M-A-N, and I'm here opposing the permit by GCI doing business as Alaska Wireless Network. Alaska Wireless Network, as you know, is GCI and ACS, 2/3 GCI, 1/3 ACS. They put their wireless assets into an entity, and ACS owns that North Wire Center, the communication building that's across the street there, and I believe that technically there is a way to get a tower up there if they need to, but GCI, like any business, made a business decision, and the most economical way to provide service is to get on top of that telephone pole, and so that's the decision that they came up with, and they should have, but this really, for you guys, is a public decision, a public, what do we accept? Do we want towers? Towers are going up and cell sites on buildings all across. I mean, look at what Verizon's doing, coming in with these huge towers, putting them up. It seems like tower of the day, and their eyesight soars, and I think that if we start putting cell sites or antennas on top of telephone poles, we're just proliferating that. I don't believe it's necessary. I do believe it's probably the cheapest way, but I don't think it's necessary. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the technology. The technology that's being used here isn't the latest and greatest technology. It is for 3G, but it's not 4G, and AWN is evolving towards 4G. That's what Verizon's network is. That's the latest and greatest technology. And this is really the existing service that GCI provides they have been providing this technology for quite a while. The new equipment is a new technology per se for the 3G. It has nothing to do with 4G and faster speeds. There's two reasons to put a cell site in. One is to expand your coverage area, and the other one is to increase capacity. I believe is what GCI is trying to do here is a little bit of both, but I also believe they can find another suitable place to place their tower. I don't speak to you today as just a typical member of the public. I retired from ACS. I worked with Nick Miller for many years there. I was a vice president of a variety of operations when I retired in 2010, and I had the responsibilities of putting towers up across the state, and so I know the process involved. And in engineering, it's always anything's possible if you have enough time and money, right? But the business equation is you only have so much money and you need to provide service, so how are you going to do that? And that's what has fallen on GCI. I think it was a correct decision for their engineers to make, but I hope it's a decision that you guys don't allow to happen. Thank you.
I have a question, and I'll go to Mr. Walker first, then I have a question.
I think I speak for most of us up here when I say that, for me, mobile technology appears to be magic. So I really don't know anything about it, but can you explain, you're talking about the 3G issue versus 4G, and can you talk about the differences between the antenna necessary for 4G versus 3G? Are you suggesting that maybe a different antenna or even a different location might be appropriate for the newer?
A different antenna for sure. The primary difference to comprehend is bandwidth. How much bandwidth can you push to the handset in each generation? And in 3G, you can get optimally maybe 10 megabits, and you can get upwards of 50, right, on 4G. And so it's a quantum leap in technology. It's a different antenna, different frequencies, and there's a whole bunch more to it besides that. But antenna locations, you have to do propagation studies, which is where does my antenna radiate and what's the loss to that. Indoor coverage is a consideration because it's not necessarily line of sight like a microwave would be. So there's differences. Now, GCI and AWN and ACS, GCI and ACS both have 3G networks they're operating today. That's what my phone works off of. And I'm not saying you should go with one carrier over another. Let the marketplace determine that. But they are building also a 4G network statewide, and it's actually up and operational today. And you can get service from it today. This cell site is not serving that. It may for voice in a short period of time, for a short period of time, but not for a long period of time. How they're overlaying 4G over 3G, that's a complicated issue, and I don't know how they're doing it specifically in Anchorage, but each terrain and usage patterns needs to be looked at individually as to where they point the sectors, where they point the antennas. Are they going to do one big cell site that radiates, like Nick mentioned, far distances, but each handset gets a little bit of bandwidth? Are they going to do a 3-sector cell site and narrow in on the subjects and give them lots of bandwidth at each handset, which is what they're going to need to do to be competitive in the large markets? But I don't know, did I confuse you with all that?
A little.
Or lose you?
If I could ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chair. So we've, especially Mr. Strike and I, have been having a conversation about these larger towers. Obviously, they're an eyesore. And there's a lot of controversy around those, and talking about some other communities, like, if you look at bigger metro areas, they have this type of infrastructure everywhere. It's on top of light poles all over the place, and it blends in a lot better. And so, we were excited to see this one for that reason. But I guess what I'm wondering is, does, so the applicant made some comments that and I'm going to overgeneralize here, so bear with me, please, that newer technology commands that the antennas are lower and more frequently dispersed. Is that comment consistent with what is necessary for 4G? I guess that was my...
Yes, I believe that that is true. However, you don't see that's what's happening. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Arizona, and I see what you're talking about. There's cell towers, Las Vegas, wherever you go, all over the place. And Anchorage is going to come that way if at some point we don't say no. You go figure it out. Yeah, it's probably going to cost you more money, but you're in business. Somebody else is doing it, right?
Okay.
That's what I think.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
You're welcome.
I have one question, if there's
Sure.
no other question. The Wire Center across the street.
Yes.
What I heard the applicant say is it would work, but it would take a tower on top of the Wire Center as opposed to just an antenna on top of the power pole. I believe that is because of the height. The Wire Center is probably 24 to 30 feet high, and so they would need to get a tower up to the similar height. My guess is a tower would be more upsetting to the neighborhood than just this antenna on top of an existing power pole. What would be your druthers?
Well, my thoughts on that were I heard exactly the same thing you did from the applicant, whatever you referred to Nick as, but I also heard him say they didn't look at it because it wasn't tall enough. Whether they can put a structure on the roof to get it tall enough or have to add a completely separate tower, I didn't hear him say they researched that. But let's say the worst case scenario, they need an independent tower to go up to 65, 75 feet. Depending on where on the property they put that, if they put that on the east side of North Wire Center, it's basically invisible except for the top part that exceeds the height of the building, unless you're running on the track at Central Junior High School, right? So I think that it needs to be looked at and what are the alternatives, and then you can decide which is the best place to put that antenna.
Okay. I have no other questions at you. Thank you very much for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Will the next person please step up?
Hello, my name is Heather Nolan. It's Knowlan. And I brought some photos of our neighborhood. Some of the photos that you received in your packet are down the alleyway that are very industrial looking. So I'm not sure if I should bring these up to you or put them on the...
Why don't you give them up to Lori right here?
All righty.
After your testimony, if you would.
Okay. So I'm respectfully requesting that you deny this application. I appreciate the fact that they're looking at using better technology. I travel a lot for work, and I'm seeing all these towers everywhere. I was just recently in Houston, and they are going to these smaller towers where they're, putting them on top of buildings or next to buildings or attaching them right to buildings. So you don't see them as much. So they're not on these big, huge monopoles. What I'm concerned about is I do live in the fall zone area, and it's concerning. This is a view that is just like Megan, right outside our back door. We recently invested in downtown, invested a lot of money remodeling a home and planning on, working with the neighborhood and cleaning up the neighborhood. It was a dilapidated house, invested a lot of money to clean it up. The main concern I have is that the pole itself is already about twice the height of the church that it's right next to. So it's very conspicuous. And even though these panels that they're talking about using are smaller profile, it's still going to be about an eight-story structure right in downtown. And there's no way of avoiding seeing that. You can see it from C Street. You can see it coming down 13th Avenue. All the rest of our neighbors that enjoy that Chugach view of why we pay the property taxes we pay to live where we live would be, it would be impeded. One of the questions that I asked during the SACC meeting to Nick was on page 71, there's a drawing, an engineering drawing of this tower that's supposed to go on top of the pole. And he kept talking about these new small panel, 12-inch panels. Underneath that, there's quite a bit bigger box. And I asked, what is the size of that box? And the specific answer we got was about yay big by yay big with hand gestures. So I think that the thing that's concerning to me is that we still don't really know how big this is going to be, what it's going to look like. I was told by Francis with planning to go and look at the tower on Arrow Street, that that's the closest comparable thing to what they're planning on doing, which we now know is not necessarily true, but we're still very unclear on what this is going to look like.
Do we have any questions for the speaker? Can you summarize very quickly? Or were you done?
Well, I ran out of time, but you know, I would also like to say I was really concerned that on the notice that went out, the links to get to the comments section is broken, and you know, it's kind of concerning to me.
Your concerns have been noted on that. We've been having that issue, and somebody noted that the call-in number didn't work, and we're working on those. Thank you very much for your testimony.
I'd like to hand out the photos as well.
Hand them up here to Lori. Will the next person please come forward?
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Manful, and I am the current president of South Addition Community Council. As you know, this poll is in our community council. It is not my intent to testify for this or against this. It is my intention to testify the feelings of South Addition on this poll.
You are testifying as a representative, correctly?
That is correct.
Thank you. Go ahead.
You are exactly correct. So GCI AWN presented at our last community council. It was about a 10 or 12-minute presentation. It was discussion afterwards, and then someone made a motion. This is it. Someone made a motion to object to the building of the extension on the telephone pole. That motion, the motion was to make a resolution to oppose the pole and the extension on the pole. That resolution, or that motion did not pass. I'm sorry, it failed. So my intention to tell you is that I was kind of surprised. There was like 70 people at this meeting, and there was this resolution, or a motion to make a resolution to oppose it, and it didn't go anywhere. Okay? That's it.
Do anybody have any questions? Thank you very much for clarifying that. We appreciate it. I appreciate your frankness. Come on, keep coming forward. There's seats down here.
Hi, good evening. My name's Tamara Johannes. I'm a nearly 20-year resident of South Addition. I live on F Street, less than a block away. I just wanted to clarify the last speaker's comment regarding the South Addition Community Council meeting, because I was there and I left the meeting after the presentation with a large number of people who were all opposed to this. I'm opposed to it. I wasn't aware there was going to be a vote, so I didn't participate in a vote, but I am opposed. So I don't feel like that information is really accurate. Thank you.
We have your testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next person.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Nancy Swanton. I live in South Addition with my other half. I feel like right now I'm kind of summarizing what everyone else has said, but I do want to make a point. I wasn't able to attend the community council meeting as much as I would have liked to in September. I was out of state, but I did read the minutes, and the vote was 10-18. So, and I would also, even though there may have been 70 people there, 70 people didn't vote. So we should probably clarify that. And I would also say that our community council voted not to oppose this proposal, but they didn't vote to support it either. So just to make that clarification. So we do have concerns about the tower. One is the adverse impact to the mountain views. You've heard about this from several folks. It's smack dab in the view shed from all directions. I am concerned about having listened to some of you and express your excitement about the smaller poles. I can understand that. On the other hand, it looks as though you may be getting a whole lot more requests for lots of these kinds of poles right on the edges of or in the middle of neighborhoods. So I think having a better understanding of all of us to understand what this minimum separation requirement is with respect to these poles and the facilities that go on top of them. Apparently, there are several homes that are within the minimum separation distance required for facilities like this. So this project would require a waiver, as has been mentioned in the past. I don't know what that separation distance is based on. It might be useful to know that. And so there may be some additional information you might want to gather in terms of that. I think I will try to. I'd also add that the structure and equipment would add an industrial element to the neighborhood and possibly affect our property values, especially those properties that are within that minimum separation zone. I guess making exceptions to zoning or making waivers to requirements can serve to benefit an individual or business at the expense of a neighborhood, but maintaining the quality of our neighborhood should be paramount. Property values and the quality of our neighborhood are at stake. I would voice with others that it's not apparent that alternatives were examined that would avoid impacts to the neighborhood. And I find it hard to believe, without a clearer, more detailed explanation, that no other feasible alternatives exist in consideration not only of the interests of the proponent, but also in consideration of the interests of the neighborhood. The proposal, as others have stated, appears to be the most expedient for the applicant. So I think some additional consideration of neighborhood values as alternatives are examined, if there are some, and I can't believe there aren't some that couldn't be presented and explained in a way that we could understand. In summary, siting a tower extension and ancillary equipment in the proposed location does not seem to be a compatible use in our neighborhood. It presents unacceptable impacts. Without an examination and a clear, detailed explanation of alternatives, this proposal does not merit, in my opinion, commission approval at this time.
A couple questions from the queue.
Yes.
Commissioner Strike.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Johannes, is that correct?
Swanton, Nancy. Mm-hmm.
One speaker off.
There we go. You talked about alternatives examined. We've heard testimony about the location on the ACS building or tower. What do you feel? What's your thoughts on the extension versus a new tower at the ACS facility?
I don't have an opinion about that right now because I don't know what the explanation. I don't have the explanation as to what the pluses and minuses are of putting it there, and I also haven't heard, as someone has mentioned, the financial aspect of it come into play or the consideration of neighborhood concerns and interests.
Okay. Are you done, Mr. Strike? Commissioner Robinson?
Yeah, if I may, I just wanted to state the waiver issue comes in, and staff, I'd ask to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it has to do with a tower from its height being at least 200% distance, so twice as high, as far away as a protective land use, which includes residential buildings, really non-commercial buildings. So I think that's where,
right.
where you'd have trouble meeting that within any residential area
right.
in the community. What I would say, just to address your other issue, to clarify, nowhere in our standards does it say to evaluate the costs of installing a tower one place over another. I don't really get that that's a part of our evaluation criteria, but impacts on the surrounding neighborhood is most certainly one of the elements under the conditional use permit.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bonnie Hepburn, and I've lived at 1307 F Street since 1979. You do the math. I'm within a corner of my property is within the 200% height radius zone. So I'm obviously going to be impacted by the visual and whatever comes out of the rays or whatever. One thing I'd like to mention, my neighbors, Tim and Raquel, who are even more impacted than I are not able to be here today. They are out of state, out of country. They wanted to be here, and they also had to leave the community council meeting early because Tim had to perform a wedding. And so those two also object to having the cell tower. One thing that did come out at the South Addition Community Council meeting was that the area of improved coverage is well outside this 200% height radius. It's actually south of us. And they said that there was no suitable place to put a tower in the area that they actually wanted to get the improved coverage. So I'm kind of curious why the neighborhood that is getting the impact is not getting improved coverage. I mean, I won't say we're not getting improved coverage, but we're not getting the most benefit from it. I mean, this is my cell phone, so you can see it doesn't matter to me what kind of coverage we're going to have. Another point I'd like to make is when they talked about the newer technology, being able to put them on light poles or places like that where they certainly wouldn't have the visual impact. So when is that newer technology going to be implemented? Is it going to be implemented next year, the year after? I mean, do we need to have this tower for improved coverage south of us right away, or can we just wait for the newer technology, which wouldn't have the visual impact? I would like to wholeheartedly encourage, this is another point, wholeheartedly encourage the permit to be null and void if our power lines and our utility lines get buried. So you agreed, you indicated that that would be put into the application, and I certainly am very much in favor of that. The other question I have is, since that's the only utility pole around, are we allowing GCI or AWN to create a monopoly by allowing them to have the only pole around? You know, I mean, it just kind of makes me wonder, is it really the only pole around, I guess is what it boils down to. And my last point I'd like to make is, and I'm not really sure about this, but I was just reading through the packet, and it said that notice and interference, an operator proposing to install or modifying tenants should provide notice to all property owners. I'm concerned about interference. I right now get 2 television channels, 4 and 11. I don't know if these will interfere with my TV reception as well. So just...
Do we have any questions for the speaker? Seeing and hearing none, thank you for your testimony.
Okay. Sorry I went over.
That's okay. We're trying to hear everybody fairly.
Hello, my name is Brent Petrie.
You're going to have to hold that in front of you and speak up.
Okay. My name is Brent Petrie, P-E-T-R-I-E. I own property with Nancy on between 11th and 12th on F Street. We're about 450 feet from this tower site. And one of the things I noticed that in the discussion this evening, there seems to be maybe an impression left that we don't have cell phone coverage in the area. I have 2 cell phones, and I have service from 2 different providers. I have 4G service in this area, and they're both, it's excellent service in both cases. So it's not as if we're desperate to have or need a cell phone provider in this area, because there already are at least 2, and they're already in use. The main issue that I have with it is a view shed issue by attachments to an electric pole. It's not a telephone pole, it is an electric utility pole. And there are, I think, some other areas that might help serve GCI. There's a similar pole near the corner of Fireweed and Arctic. It's a totally commercial area. There's a parking lot there, office buildings, Speedy Glass is across the street. I understand from the information in the packet there might be other towers in the area, but it would seem that that kind of location would propagate a signal to the area that GCI is interested in and not be in the residential area that where this proposal is offered. Anyway, that's all I offer. Thank you.
No question. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony, sir.
Hi. I'm ready to go home, but I would like to add something. My name is Larry Cleveland. I live 500 feet from the proposed area there, 12th and F Street. And I don't want to have to repeat everything. I think that everybody said pretty much it's going to be unsightly. Probably, the pole is too, and electricity. And so I have talked to ML&P, but it's been probably 5 years ago, where they said it was on the long-range plan to have our neighborhood bury the electric line. So I think it is in the long-range plan, and I think the reason is for safety, but also for to make Anchorage a better place. So I think if that's the long-range plan, I think we need to be thinking about aesthetics and neighborhoods more, and figure out maybe where these could be, where it'd be less out in the open, for cell phone antennas. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that it said in there that 200% of the height of it, which is about 200 feet, I think it said, there's homes in that area, but also the map showed the pole being on the west side of the alley, when it's on the, no, it showed on the west side of the alley, but it's on the east side of the alley. So it's actually closer to Chugach Optional School, where my son goes to school. And so the school, I think, is in that area, or it's right up to the door. And they didn't show that on there. They showed it stopping in the middle of the street. So I think that's incorrect. Anyway, I oppose it, and I think there's lots of opposition in the neighborhood, and so I think you should consider that and think about denying it and see if they can find another spot. I think they can find another spot for it. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? Seeing and hearing none, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
your testimony, sir.
Hello. My name is Teresa Arnold, and I oppose this proposed site for the following reasons. I think it will dramatically and negatively affect the view shed for sure. I happen to live in the fall zone, so I'm concerned about the safety issue also. It will be close to 8 stories tall, right in the alley
Step
there.
a little closer to the mic,
I'm sorry.
please.
It will also dramatically affect the character of the neighborhood. This is a historic neighborhood, well documented. I think it was platted, if that's the proper term, in 1915. So there are homes, log cabins close by this proposed site, and houses that were built in, I don't know, 20s, 30s maybe. I'm also concerned about potential decrease in property values. I'm not going to mention health effects, but more and more people are concerned about that, so I think that that affects their decision when they're looking for a home. If they happen to see a cellular antenna, they're less likely to purchase, or more likely to look for something else. So those are my concerns, and the FCC, I know, grants a lot of power to telecommunications companies, but they also grant a little bit to local government. So I am hoping that based on all these comments tonight and the packets that you have, that you will deny this permit and put it somewhere else. I've done a lot of research on these DAS nodes, and they really are able to camouflage them and hide them, and they're virtually invisible. I don't know a lot about the technology, but I've just seen photos of these antennae that are painted the same color as buildings, or they're in church steeples and you can't even see them, or on water towers and they're painted the same color so you can't see them. So I would hope that GCI would want a win-win situation for South Addition, and those of us who are close by it for sure are very much opposed to it. I'm very concerned about the safety issue. So when I purchased permits to renovate my house, I asked why I needed them, and the gentleman said, these codes are for your protection. You need these permits for your protection. Well, that 200% is for our protection, and the height restrictions are for our protection. So that's all I have to say, and thank you.
Hang on a second there. Do we have any questions for the speaker? I congratulate you on your written testimony. It drove me to my dictionary. I believe you have misspelled camogaloged.
I did. Yep, I saw that.
I saw that word, and I had to go check it out. But I appreciate that.
And it
very
wasn't
much.
in there.
No, I found it.
Oh,
It has
you
a
did?
U in it. You missed a U.
Oh.
We read the testimony, people, on that one. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Anyone else? Mr. Miller, would you come back for your rebuttal time, please?
Thank you. I do know this is controversial. Cell phone towers and antennas are controversial statewide. We permit these towers statewide. I would like to point out a few things. There was a lot of concern about the structural integrity of this pole. It has been run through a structural analysis. It is on page 56 of the packet, and it was completed by Gregory Erico. He's a stamp PE in Alaska. And this was not a very quick and cheap process. If you look at that structural, it was completed on 19 November 2012. So it's not like we just decided to do something this year and are trying to get the cheapest, most economical solution. When we select these sites, the engineering is becoming more and more precise. 5 years ago, we had a 1 mile radius search ring. Today, we're down to blocks, eighth of a mile. And a search ring is where we want to place the site based on all the existing sites around it. They are very well engineered. Every detail is looked at, and we don't just run out and say, where can I stick something cheaply? These networks are engineered and planned over years. So as you can see, we've been planning on putting something in this area since 2012. Mr. Bowman, I know Mike. I've known Mike for 20 years. Some of the things he said were correct, some were incorrect, basically about the technology we're placing at this facility with these remote radio units. It is a new technology. It is a smaller technology. It doesn't require the big base stations that everybody's used to seeing at the bottom of the towers, 6 foot by 8 foot structures with radios, power connections. These remote radio units are providing 4G service and voice. They are not providing LTE. LTE, as everyone knows, is the new technology. Right now, the drawback with LTE is it doesn't provide voice. VoLTE, which is the new technology, has had its first deployment nationwide. Has a lot of, I would say, growing up to do before a company wants to deploy it to an existing customer base. When we get to the point we want to replace the 4G UMTS technology with the 4G LTE technology, all we have to do is take those remote radio units down and put these new LTE units up. So it is looking at the future. It's going to use the same facility in the future with the same size remote radio unit that's already up there. And as I said, I would like some explanation myself sometime on the 200% fall radius. I'm not sure what it's for. I've had this issue, I think, for 20 years. I've been doing this for 20 years in the municipality of Anchorage. I would like some follow-up on that as well one day. So I don't know if you have any more questions.
Commissioner Strike.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. some of the questions that came up during the testimony, and one of the ambiguities or questions out there, what is the radius of the apparatus that will go on the top of the pole?
The radius. Well, I would have to refer to the documents.
Please do.
There is actually, if I can find it. I'm not sure that radius is actually called out in the, if you include the antennas and everything.
That was brought up in a couple of the testimonies that we heard as far as some discussion as to the dispute or the ambiguity that was presented at one of the hearings. Is it safe to say it's a slimmer profile?
To a normal tower and a normal, what I would call crow's nest at the top, much.
It is.
Yeah.
Normal's crow's nest.
It's much smaller than a normal tower top.
Mr. Miller, would you please use the microphone?
Oh,
We're
sorry.
recording this, whereas we can hear you, but the recorder can't.
If you would, I guess, look at page 71 of the document. This is the most detailed drawing that we have of the facility.
It was also provided in a handout to us, but it's unable to determine the
I would agree it's very difficult to determine what the exact radius of this is. And I would not want to say without bigger drawings I can actually read.
So we have a 79, 80-foot cell phone mono pole, in theory, with this apparatus at the top. Now, you testified earlier, or you spoke earlier, that the technology was allowing you to put this apparatus on lower poles, that the towers were coming down.
They are, and they will continue to come down.
Below 80 feet?
In the future, yes, below 80 feet.
To what level?
If you want my synopsis of where the technology is going, right now we're looking at the new technology, and it's called a dot radio. And it is literally the size of what I would call, looks like a fire alarm that you would put in a building. And the technology is going to where you would start putting these inside of the buildings, possibly near windows, possibly near walkways, where they will actually cover outside as you're walking by and inside when you're in the building. Are we planning on deploying some dots? Yes, we are. We're going to deploy some in 2015, but not in the tradition to where we would deploy several thousand of these, let's say in the downtown Anchorage area, and pull all the other towers down, but it will get there.
Let's come back around. How big of a tower do you need?
Depends on the location. If you're
This location, how big of a tower do you need?
our initial look at this was 90 feet. The engineer said that to get optimal coverage and to provide all the service we want a 90-foot structure. We actually went down and reviewed the area and said, 90 feet is not going to work in this community or this neighborhood. What do we have available in the existing search ring? And this was what was available at a height that would give us, I would say, acceptable coverage, but it's not the coverage that we want.
So you would need a 90-foot pole in which you would not co-locate or have the ability or desire or need, or technology wouldn't allow you to co-locate anybody else.
If we built a 90-foot tower, we would build a co-locatable structure, but it would be much bigger in stature then, and much more.
You mean taller than 90 feet?
Excuse me?
Taller than 90 feet?
We would build it 90 feet because that's what we need. Other people could co-locate underneath of it.
Because they don't need the same height. Because they won't need the same height.
They may need something higher. They actually may need something higher. Okay. I would say that the tower that you talked about at 15th and Gamble is an example of where a company needed a tower, they built a tower, but they located at the height they needed and built the tower another 80 feet taller. That's not a practice we do. We build the structure to the height that we need, and then we build it structurally sound enough to hold more carriers.
It was indicated, and I think through the testimony we understood that, and when I say you, ACS, owns the building across the street?
Yes, to the south a bit, yes.
Is this, and this option was not looked at to place a tower on that site?
The option was looked at to place a tower. Based on the terrain, it would actually have to be taller, but our preference is not to build a new tower. People don't want us to build a new tower. If we would have applied for a permit, I mean, we'd be here going through this process again, but we would be building a big steel monopole with a 3-foot base. You know what a tower is. And that would even be, I would say, less receptive to the neighbors.
Okay.
Are you done, Mr. Strike? Mr. Spring, then Mr. Voorhees.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for testifying and good information. My question, I guess, is we hear all the conditional uses here, so we've heard a few of these so far. I've never been involved in a hearing for conditional use where cell tower was located within a residential area. It's always been in a business zone district. To me, that makes a difference. Are there other examples? I haven't seen them, but are there other examples where there have been poles, towers located within a residential district?
I do know that there are some towers in residential districts or abutted right up next to, let's say, a property line that is a residential district. Unfortunately, I don't have any address to give you, but I do know that there are towers in residential neighborhoods.
We had one on the staff question there.
We had one at Northern Lights.
Well, that was a business district.
Yeah, but it was abutting a resident on the other side of the alley.
This is a residentially zoned district.
Okay, after he's done, you can go talk to staff. Mr. Voorhees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Miller, kind of, not so much a question I got, maybe just a kind of a synopsis here, is that you think you used a technical term, it was synergy or surgery, it's basically the technical term of where you guys place your towers. What was?
It's getting very precise. When we want to improve our network or we do a 4 or 5 year plan, which is what we do, when the cell phones were much higher power, we didn't have very many customers, you had a very, back in the MacTel days, you had 6 or 7 sites covering from Chugiak all the way down to Hope. Mm-hmm. And you had very large areas that you could place these cells because, number one, you didn't have a lot of customers. It was analog technology. So you could be far from the tower and get good service. Now we have a lot of customers. The technology, the high data speeds, what people are requiring, require you to place the facilities much closer, and they require you to place the antennas much lower. I used to give the examples. Anchorage, the Anchorage wireless network, there's 65 sites in Anchorage today, and that's basically from the way station to Potter's Marsh. And when you build a new cell site on one part of town, it ripples clear through the network through RF. That RF, the higher the antennas are, the farther it propagates. It causes interference, slower data speeds, bad voice quality, drop calls. So that's why the placement of these cells is very precise, because the area you're trying to cover is getting very small, and you want to provide service to very specific areas. I can remember 15 years ago being out at Kincaid Park, and I made a phone call on the cell site at the Ship Creek Power Plant. And I was astonished, and I do this for a living. Today, if that happened, it would affect thousands of customers. So that's why these placements are very, it's precision now. It's not about get these big tall towers everywhere and cover miles and miles. It's very small towers, serve this certain customer base, and it's very precise.
Well, thank you very much. This is kind of the follow-up, is that the precision of these new technological towers, we'll call it. Basically, when you guys started your analysis of this, you said, okay, we need 90-foot pole. It wouldn't fly with the neighborhood. GCI mitigated the kind of the view shed, and also tried to say, okay, we're going to put it on a 70-foot pole. And if it's not ideal for Alaska Wireless, but you recognize that before you came to the community council meeting, that you're going to lower it 20 feet, minimize your service, but still have an operable product, if you will, in the tower.
Correct.
And you said another carrier may need more height. Say if you were to build a 90-foot monopole, as their placement of their towers may not be as ideal to carry kind of the spectrum, if you will, that is Alaska Wireless's network. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I think that's correct. I didn't really understand that.
Basically, you guys decided that lower the pole 20 feet as a consideration to the neighborhood before you even came with your proposed project.
Most definitely. Permitting this has been a challenge, and we keep calling it a tower. I keep calling it a utility pole and putting antennas on it. And I know it's the way the code is written that it is going to become a tower, but we don't want to build towers. And it's not because of financial costs. We build towers all the time. It's part of what we do. But if we can improve service to an acceptable level in an area without physically building a structure, we always do that first.
Thank you very much for being clear on that point and also for the thorough package.
Thank you.
Mr. Voorhees?
I am, thank you.
Mr. Walker?
Earlier during public testimony, someone made the comment that the area that you're attempting to benefit with better coverage is not necessarily the area that's being impacted in terms of, I think they were referring to the view shed. Can you, in layman's terms, kind of elaborate on the area that you are hoping to increase coverage in?
Well, the area that will get the most coverage is about a block and a half south. They will get the most benefit, but the entire neighborhood will benefit.
Okay, so are we talking about, in general, like the Valley of the Moon Park area then? Is that? Or
if you look in the package, there's a propagation map on, I'm sorry, I'm not more familiar with this package.
41, 42?
Page 47 of the packet.
Yeah, it is page 47. If you look, it's just south of 15th. It's about a block south of where the tower is. Those neighborhoods will see the most impact. They'll see I'd say the most bars go up on their phones. But the
yellow
folks
areas then? Sorry.
closer to it will see better signal strength, and they'll see faster data speeds. Sometimes you get that voicemail indicator on your phone and it never rang.
Right.
It cures things like that.
Okay. So just so I'm clear, the area that's highlighted in yellow, that's the area that you're attempting to serve?
That is not the only area we're attempting to serve. We're really looking to, but it'll see the most improvement.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. I'd like to ask a follow-up question, if I may. Do you know what the approximate height of this? There's the center that ACS owns. I understand they're your partner in this. That's come up. Do you know what the approximate height of that location is? I mean, did you guys consider that at all?
The building itself is at about 30 feet, but the terrain starts to drop off as you go down the hill, which means if you drop 20 feet in elevation, you'd actually have to build a taller tower to get to the 90 feet that you're at the top of the hill, or in our example, 78 feet.
Okay.
So I understand that it is a more industrial area.
Okay.
Any further questions for the applicant? Mr. Miller, you're excused.
Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Spring, you had a question for staff. Now would be a good time.
Okay. I have to admit, I find that the ordinance is a little bit confusing and pertaining to cell towers, and there's so many different tower types and whatever. I was hoping you could clarify something for me, though. The one case I'm familiar with is the one on Northern Lights that we approved about a year ago. And that was a larger tower and a monopole. And I forget how big it was. It was 90 feet or something, or 120 feet. But we approved a conditional use, but it was outside the 200% distance. Can you explain where the 200% distance applies? In that case, they could not have put a pole within 200% of the height of the tower from a residence, right? But in this case, it seems like that's expected and within a neighborhood. I don't understand that.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, if you're referring to the tower that's located at Northern Lights and Arrow Street?
No, it's the Northern Lights in Lake Otis.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, you're referring to the Church Medical Tower. And I believe they had originally come in with a 65-foot tower and ended up bringing it down to about 45 feet. The code, I don't know where the 200%, why 200%. That's been in code for some time. But it does say, the code does say at 2145-265 A16C, after giving due consideration to the comments of the applicant, the property owner, and the local community council, the minimum separation distance set forth in the paragraph B above may be reduced or eliminated by the administrative official. Why that wasn't brought up in that case, I'm not sure.
Oh, so they could have gone through the administrative process since
Well,
it was lower?
This does allow the administrative official to reduce or eliminate the separation distance during an administrative review of a tower. And as you may recall, in certain districts, towers under certain heights go through an administrative site plan review rather than a conditional use process.
So this is an exception because it's within 200%?
Well, no. This is a conditional use because it exceeds the tower height allowed in the residential district. And while the administrative official could have made a ruling on the waiver, it seemed, since we were coming to the commission anyway as a conditional use due to the increased tower height, that it was most appropriate for the commission to act as the administrative official in determining whether or not a waiver of the fall down distance should be granted.
Wow. That's, now I understand why I was confused. Is this can I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
As I said to the petitioner, I don't remember any cases, we haven't had that many, I guess, where there's been conditional use for a tower this height in a residential neighborhood. My concern, I guess, is that are we setting a precedent here where this is the first time this has happened anywhere in the city where conditional use for a cell tower 65 of this height within a residential district is going to be approved?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, in my 2.5 years in this position, there was a tower in the Turnagain neighborhood that was done through administrative site plan review that was placed, co-located with a utility substation in a residential district, actually right across the street from the mayor's house.
But it was smaller?
Well, it was 65 feet or slightly less, which is the limit that it can be in a residential district to be approved through administrative site plan review. And it was quite controversial, but in the end, in the neighborhood did not support it, but in the end, the staff concluded that it did meet the standards and the neighborhood did not choose to appeal.
So this is the first time, though, that a tower this height has been considered then in a residential neighborhood?
I couldn't say. I can't think of one, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been one. There was a situation, it was a conditional use for a tower to go on a light pole electrical pole at Northern Lights and Arrow Street, which is in a residential area. But I don't know about the fall down radius.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, as McConnell Erica was saying, yes, in August 2nd of 2010, there was a conditional use for a cell tower on top of an existing utility pole, similar to this, and the same concerns from the Planning and Zoning Commission were brought up, and there was residential structures within the 200% fall down radius.
And that was approved?
That was approved.
Does it have, can it be anywhere within, sorry, Mr. Chair, can it be anywhere within a residential neighborhood, or does it have to be like co-located with a church or something?
Well, the code reads that telecommunication towers are not permitted on the same lot as a residential use. However, they are permitted in residential districts with non-residential uses, such as churches, schools, utility substations, centers. To follow up with that, if telecommunication towers were not permitted in these residential districts, there would be large areas of the community with no coverage.
I believe that there's 3 towers at the corner, or near the corner of Rabbit Creek and Old Seward. One is on an industrial piece of property, one is on a church piece of property, and the third one, I believe, is in a residential area. But I was looking at those the other day, that there are 3 right there. Are you done, Mr. Spring? Mr. Cange?
Thank you, through the chair. Ms. McConnell, could you shed some light on the letter from, it looks like, it's on page 103 from Long Range Planning in our packet. It seems to conflict with Rusty Municipal's findings or recommendations.
Through the chair, Mr. Cange, could you repeat your question?
I'm just wondering if you could shed a little more light on this letter, as it seems to conflict with municipality's findings, and this person is with, I mean, no other department had problems, safety, but it looks like Long Range Planning had some objection to this. I'm just wondering if you could, you guys look at this and analyze this in your recommendations, and it doesn't seem like any of this was taken into account, particularly the comment with the...
Well, they suggested that no additional providers be allowed to use the pole extension other than GCI, and I think has come out through this process that there's only proposed to be one cell antenna on this pole. In the opinion of this planner, the project should receive the support of the South Addition Community Council to move forward, but that is not technically a code requirement. And I think the petitioner has spoken as to why the Pioneer Home or the Inlet Tower building would not be would not serve their needs. I'm afraid that neither Mr. Odell nor I have the expertise to dispute that claim from the petitioner.
Okay,
does that answer your question?
I'm just curious, when she mentions that this project should comply with all MOA codes, clearly we're looking for a variance from...
Well, sure, but it is, I mean, there is a provision in code that says this sort of waiver is allowed. So to the way I interpret it is that the code says you have the ability to grant the waiver. So if you grant it, it complies then with the code. If you choose not to grant it, that's also, I mean, you're set up as the decision-making body for that particular question.
Sure, thank you.
I'd like to clarify something I was just pointed out to me, and this is for everybody. Looking on pages 10 and 11 of your application, this to go forward will take 2 motions. It takes a motion first for approval of a conditional use, and then it takes a motion for approval of waiver for the separation. So it would take 2 motions to go forward, and I assume if it passes on one and fails on the other one, it fails on that. Seeing and hearing no further action. What is the wish of the body on case 2014-0119, GCI, Doing Business Alaska Network, conditional use to allow for a 10-foot extension to an existing 68-foot tall utility pole? Commissioner Walker.
I move to adjourn to a committee of the whole so we can work through a couple of these issues amongst ourselves and then make a decision.
Mr. Voorhees, do you second that motion?
I didn't see that coming. No, I do not.
And you can withdraw your second if you want. Okay, do we have a second to Mr. Walker's motion? Mr. Spring, we have a motion and a second to adjourn to a committee of the whole. Any objection to that? Any objection at all? Okay, we are now in a committee of the whole. Mr. Walker, it's your committee.
Well, since I'm the mover, I guess I'll state my concerns. Clearly, we're acting as the decision maker for this waiver. I think I was personally caught off guard by that. I don't know about the rest of you. There seems to be a pretty substantial amount of public opposition here, and I'm not sure if public opposition in and of itself is enough to deny the application, but I'm certainly not as comfortable moving forward on this as I would be with some of the other things we've passed before. I guess I'd welcome comments from the rest of you, and Tyler in particular. I mean, I think you have a lot of experience in planning, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
Mr. Robinson's lucky because Mr. Spring's going in first.
Well, yeah.
Just a second, John. We're in a committee of the whole. It's the same group. This allows us to discuss it. We will then come out of the committee of the whole before we take a formal action. This is just a parliamentary maneuver to allow us to try to figure out what we're doing here. Don't worry, we're getting to a decision. Commissioner Spring.
In our own way, we're getting to it. I'm kind of torn a little bit on this one. I mean, I like the idea that it's on a existing pole. I mean, that's to be commended. I mean, much better than those monopoles. We all know examples of really bad-looking monopoles. But, okay, but my concern is that I don't really want to see 80-foot poles of any kind in residential neighborhoods. And if we approve this one, how can I ever not approve another one that is even more of a blight, perhaps? What if the pole is like, not 65 feet? What if it's poles, 40 feet, and you have a 40-foot extension? Are you going to allow that? I mean, it's still on a pole, and it's still, 80 feet in a neighborhood, but it's substantially bigger than the existing pole. Are we just approving this one because it's just a 10-foot extension? Is that all? Is that because it doesn't seem to be much of an impact? I don't know where we draw the line exactly on where do we allow the poles to be extended, how high, and in which situations. And just, I don't want to get myself in a situation, I think, where I'm going to be forced to approve it every time one comes in a residential neighborhood. And there's a lot of examples where this could be put in. There's churches all over the place in residential neighborhoods. My neighborhood, for instance, is Church City. I have a church in my backyard, which I don't think is a conflict of interest necessarily. But we have scattered throughout. Plus schools. We have schools and daycares and all kinds of situations where you could put it in almost any neighborhood. And so I guess that's something we need to consider. Do we want to set that precedent, at least for this commission?
Ms. Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's some things we kind of need to set aside. And I mean, they're emotional and they're part of the argument, but I think we have to face the fact that cellular service has become an essential utility service. I can imagine that if we were coming into this neighborhood to put in above ground power at some point, 50 years ago, some people may have been very concerned about the neighborhood character and the unsightliness of, what are actually pretty ugly poles in an historic neighborhood. The pole is there. It's unattractive as it is. I think we just have to realize that it's ugly, with or without an additional crow's nest on top. But the other couple pieces I think we need to set aside are that our purview is not to evaluate whether or not this is a good business investment. Our purview is to evaluate what this has to do in terms of community service, community safety, how we balance those values. It's the petitioner's decision that they feel that this is their best business investment. It's not our job to second guess it and tell them to go somewhere else. So we have to, we have to evaluate on the merits of the case. I think Commissioner Spring brings up a very good point, though, in terms of what is the precedent that we're setting, and I think we need to be very clear about that as we continue the discussion. I think the other point I was going to make, it's also, I think, beyond our purview, given the lack of the kind of technical information of this nature that this commission deals with. I mean, we're not the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. We're not the FCC. We are not in a position of making a decision about the necessity or not of this utility service. So that's all I have to add now.
Mr. Robinson.
Since I was requested, I think, wearing my tinfoil hat for a second, I think that I don't understand how decisions to underground power lines happen in this community. It's something I've never quite understood. I think
slowly.
I saw them happen in East Anchorage recently in an area that, sort of bore the brunt of the windstorm a few years back. And so clearly there was some safety brought into the decision to underground there, and I think similarly on the hillside, it's something that's considered. But I don't understand it generally. I do, however, think that it's an interesting sort of issue if the decision-making body that's making the business decision to underground is also driving additional revenue from devices. I don't know how things get affected by that. I think the reality is you have a plan in this community to underground. I wish ML&P were here to say, what is the plan? When does it happen? And because then what you're saying is, okay, we're approving a temporary fix, and they can make a business decision, and perhaps that's mitigating, but they might also say, if you didn't have those towers there, or the telephone poles or the power poles, and they decided to locate a monopole across the street, in my mind, it would almost assuredly be worse. And so I don't have anything for you, Mr. Walker, other than I'm conflicted.
Mr. Voorhees.
Thank you, the Chair. I have to agree with Commissioner Robinson, because I agree that a monopole would be worse in this circumstance, and also kind of through Mr. Miller's testimony, the strategy of where these sites are placed. 90 feet is optimal for Alaska Wireless Network because of where their other satellites their other cell sites are placed. But on a monopole, if they were to construct one, and it would be co-located, if you would, where there'd be other carriers on it, there could be the possibility that it'd actually have to exceed 90 feet to get the specific performance that would be required on a co-occupant lease.
I'll weigh in. Cell phones are a necessity. I'm certain everybody that testified tonight has a cell phone in their pocket. I'm on the hillside, sort of. I'm on Potter Marsh. And most of that hillside is residential, and we're going to end up needing to put cell sites in that hillside for coverage. So Mr. Spring's concern, whereas he sees it as a detriment, I see it as something that's got to happen on it. I feel that given the druthers, I've got an ugly pole, which everybody agrees with. I'd rather put a 10-foot tall mast on top of that ugly pole and have one thing and have it over with. I understand, and I will try to put language in regarding undergrounding, and I will try to put language in regarding painting of the box so it's less, we do what we can to camouflage it, but I think we need to do something there, and this is the best, and that's what we have to do. In my opinion, I'm one vote of 9 or 8 this evening. Mr. Sporhees, are you going to move to come out of the committee of the whole, or you got a comment?
I'm going to move to come out of the committee of the whole.
Do we have a second? We have a second by Ms. Barker. Okay, we are now out of the committee of the whole. In regards to case 2014-0119, what is the wish of the body? Mr. Sporhees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Correct me if I'm wrong, we have 2 motions, so the first one would be for the conditional use, correct? Or
That is correct.
okay.
Thank you for pointing that out.
So I will be supporting the recommendation to allow the conditional use of the 10-foot extension to the existing 68-foot tall utility pole for cellular communications equipment in the R2 district for a maximum height not to exceed 79 feet. Kind of finding of the facts is the first testimony, Mr. Carl Heil. Apologize if I didn't correct your name or pronounce your name correctly. Through the thorough package and the data supplied, that addressed his structural concerns.
Mr. Sporhees, will you hold up on your findings until we get a second, please?
Just for you, of course.
Thank you very much. Do we have a second? We have a second, Ms. Barker. Thank you very much. Continue, Mr. Sporhees.
Thank you. Just kind of to circle back, I think the structural concerns has been identified and thoroughly explained through the packet and through Alaska Wireless Network. I think that through Mr. Miller's testimony, Alaska Wireless Network recognized that the neighborhood's concerns and not to build a 90-foot monopole that would give them optimal performance for their product. They looked to sacrifice performance and also an additional 10 feet for neighborhood concerns and quality of life in Viewshed, and not having a 90-foot monopole that kind of echoes the thoughts of Mr. Robinson, which I think would be a little worse. And then I would like to kind of revisit, and this might not be a finding of the fact, but there is no clear line in the sand on these types of cases and the cases we're going to see going forward, and I think they need to be looked closely at kind of a case-by-case basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sporhees. Ms. Barker, do you have anything to add or to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'll be supporting the motion for most of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Feel the petitioner has represented a sound case. There is no denying the fact that the existing pole is unattractive, and when I look at the pictures and also pull up Google Earth, there's a lot of distraction, interruption of the view shed. I find that adding this basically less than 3 foot in diameter basket at the top is not going to substantially detract any more from the view shed than the existing pole. And that further it will expand an essential public service in the community in terms of wireless service.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. Are you done? Just nod yes, save your voice. Any other comments on this motion? Mr. Robinson?
I'd like to amend the motion to add a condition that in the event that the power line is undergrounded, the cell tower approval shall be considered void.
Is that accepted, Mr. Sporhees?
It is. I'd like to also kind of amend that should the power go underground, that the neighborhood can choose to kind of void the cell phone tower, or if they want to just leave a monopole without any power lines, that Alaska Wireless Network has the ability to do that.
That'd be awfully awkward, and maybe at best,
Really?
if it is underground, the applicant could come back and ask the board for permission to stay. I don't know how we would have the neighborhood and who the neighborhood is, and the process would be a little bit awkward.
Well, I agree, and I guess kind of the basis of that would be, so the neighborhoods, today you have an 80-foot tower, and the power lines go away, and Alaska Wireless Network or whatever comes back and says that they need a 90-foot tower or a 100-foot tower. You're kind of left with something that's a little bit less of an eyesore than a new monopole coming in. That's kind of what my thought was.
Mr. Robinson, would you care to speak to that? Then we'll go to Mr. Kange.
I think, Mr. Chair, my point is that they'd have to come in for a new application, and whether that new application consisted of them maintaining the existing infrastructure anew, that would be, that would be their, so my motion, I think, stands. I hear the concern. They'd have that flexibility under that.
I agree with that, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kange.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I reluctantly support the amendment to this motion, and I think my biggest reluctance is in the fact that the petitioner and the petitioner's representative did not gain the support of the community council, which I always like to see in these types of cases. But again, some of the other comments, it's just one of those things of the lesser of two evils. Do we propose a new pole, or do we add 10 foot to an existing electrical pole? So having said that, I tend to support Mr. Robinson's amendment.
I'm being asked to clarify over here for staff who's trying to keep up with this. Mr. Sporhees, have you accepted Mr. Robinson's?
Mr. Chair, I think we just have to vote on the motion to amend. And
Okay, all right, we can vote on a motion to amend. We have a Mr. Robinson has a motion, and Mr. Walker has seconded. Mr. Kane just pulled out. Mr. Spring on the motion to amend only. And then we'll get that out of the way first.
Okay, I have another amendment.
Let's take this amendment first, and then we'll come to you next. Okay, on the Robinson motion to, if it goes underground, it's voided. That has passed unanimously on that. Okay, now, I believe that Mr. Spring, did I skip over anybody who was going to testify? Mr. Spring, and then we'll go to Mr. Walker. Mr. Spring.
I don't see how I can make a motion to amend, but I'll propose it anyway.
It's clear now. You can make a motion to amend.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would like to amend it to include reference to the site plan on page 94, as well as the technical drawings, which are, now there's two separate sets, I believe, but the one that was handed out during the meeting, sheet number E1, sheet number E-102, and sheet number E2, in order to clarify the point that was brought up earlier regarding what are we approving, and it makes it clear, I think, that they can't replace it with a monopole. The conditional use is not carte blanche. It's related to the specific plans that were submitted with the application.
And does that also include painting the box to match the church?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have a second on Mr. Spring's motion? Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Any discussion on this motion to amend by Commissioner Spring outlining the requirements as to the documents we've received and painting the box to match the church? Let's vote on our machines. That has passed unanimously. Now we are back, I believe, to Mr. Sporhe's main motion. And I don't remember who seconded it.
I have an amendment.
Okay,
That I would like-
just a second. We're locked up or something going on. We have a computer screen in front of us that tells me when somebody wants to speak. That's the kind I'm talking about in the queue, and also tells us what we're voting on and who's voted and how they voted. And it's locked up currently, and so we can't do anything. And so I'm just trying to let you know what we're doing up here. We frequently go to thumbs up here. I'm sorry to say it, but it's a legitimate way.
There it is. No.
No?
motion.
While she's looking, Mr. Walker, you had a motion to amend. Let's get that going.
I still don't understand this technology thoroughly, but it seems to me that it's constantly changing like anything else, and we heard testimony tonight that there is a better technology on the horizon. Maybe it's a year away, maybe it's 10 years away, but dot radio is the technology that I'm referencing. I would like to propose an amendment that if the applicant serves this area with dot radio, that they would remove this facility.
May I comment on that?
Yeah, you're going to have to speak up here, Mr. Spring.
Yes, and this is something staff can probably support, I think, because I think in the previous case that I was involved with, particularly the one, the tower on Lake Otis and Northern Lights that I referenced, I don't think planning staff mentioned this, but zoning staff said that the towers must be replaced if it's not in use. It must be taken out if it's not in use. And that is according to the municipal code, right, staff? So basically what you're saying is in code already. It isn't? Oh, okay.
Well, I think my concern would be that if there's a technology that you can put on top of the junior high school or in top of a church steeple that's completely invisible, I'd rather see it there than on the top of this pole that we've approved for this purpose. It seems purpose-driven to me.
Mr. Walker, though, I think the language, if the tower is not in use, it should be removed. I think that covers it. Well, speak, Mr.
I disagree that with Mr. Walker's motion, he's stipulating that with newer technology being developed and coming forward, that there will be other options other than going 90 feet up on a tower that's currently in place, and that they're not going to be granted ad infinitum use of this tower space, but that with increased technology, they will be encouraged to move that tower into the technology field arena. As far as not using it, that's a whole different issue.
That's an area we haven't gone, to my knowledge, requiring somebody to constantly update something. And I mean, I'm not here to argue, it's not my job as chair, but I could see the neighborhood that's being served is south of the neighborhood in question. And so if they put dots in the neighborhood in question, does that mean they take out the tower and they lose service to the yellow area? That's my concern. I mean, I'm in supporting if they don't need the tower and don't use the tower comes down. We've had that requirement frequently.
That's in the code.
And so if that's...
I agree. I think it's going to be difficult to ascertain if what area is being served, and probably difficult to enforce that. If anybody has any suggestions, or I'd be willing to withdraw the motion. I'll withdraw.
Okay. Mr. Spring, are you out of queue now? We're back on the screen. Everybody, I think. Okay. Mr. Sporhees, would you restate? No, I don't now. I do too. Everybody hit on the floor. Okay, Mr. Sporhees, would you hit motion? Ms. Barker, would you hit second? Fine, thank you. Mr. Sporhees, this is the main motion to approve, as stated earlier, the approval for conditional use. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Any questions on that motion? Any questions on that motion? May we please vote on that motion? Okay, that motion passed 6-2 on that. Now we need a motion for approval of the waiver for separation, which is B on page 11. Can you clear our machines? Nope. Do we hit on the floor again? On the floor again. Oh, well, we're back to that one. Now okay, there. Okay, we have our machines working again. I apologize, it's technology. This technology is about 1970s, gang. We need what's the wish of the body on the recommends approval of a waiver for separation? Thank you, Mr. Sporhees.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the conditional waiver of separation. That the department recommends the approval of a waiver for the protected land use to allow a monopole, cellular, or wireless communication tower not to exceed 79 feet in height in the R2M multifamily residential district, generally located within the alley right-of-way at the northwest corner of 13th Avenue and East Street.
Do we have a second? We have a second. Thank you, Ms. Barker. Mr. Sporhees, would you like to talk to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be appropriate just to kind of go back to the findings of fact in the original motion on this?
I think we can do that.
I'd like to just put that on record. Thanks.
Ms. Barker, do you have anything to say on the motion?
Nothing additional.
Any other commissioner care to speak on this motion? Mr. Walker.
I will be reluctantly supporting this motion, and I think Ms. Barker made an important comment earlier, which is that cellular service is an important utility, and ultimately I think that this represents the lesser of evils in this case, and that doesn't make it a good thing, and I'm sorry for that, but this feels like the right thing to do in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I have a little difficulty with this case, but I appreciate Mr. Ferguson's comment. I mean, about it is probably inevitable that there's going to be cell towers in residential areas, and there's nothing we can do about it. And the code was written that way, after all. It anticipated that. I'm a little bit concerned, though, about how close this is. I mean, it's not just a little bit out within the 200%. It's right across the alley from a house. backyard. I mean, to me, that's kind of push. I mean, you can't get any closer. So there is no limit, apparently. Just throw away the 200% completely. It's just irrelevant, is what we're saying. There is no distance, separation distance required. It'd be easier if it was, 180 feet away, 180% from the house. But so I'm a little concerned about voting for this, just because it says we don't have a separation distance. There is no such thing. You're waiving the ordinance. You're not waiving the distance. You're waiving the ordinance. So I'm having trouble with that part of it.
I would be more concerned with a guide antenna and the 200%. I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm driven by numbers. The 200%, the 200%, I mean, you take something and it falls, it's not going to fall 200%. It's going to fall 100%. But the 200% is the code. Is there any other commissioner care to speak on this motion? This motion is an approval of a waiver for the separation on case 2014-0119. Would you please use your machines? Okay, that did not pass. We tied at 4-4, which means the prior one did not pass. Mr. Sporhees.
I guess I might be asking this question for the petitioner, but where could they go from here? Do they come back for the body, or what is the next?
The commissioner can have, the petitioner may have appeal rights. Appeals may be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after the Planning Zoning Commission's final decision, which will be by the resolution that we have before us, probably on November 10. Is that correct? Because we have nothing to come before us on November 3rd. So our next meeting is November 10. I did count. Mr. Walker, is that a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Mr. Sporhees has seconded it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Before you adjourn, I just wanted to clarify the training opportunity. I understand that there's an option for 2 commissioners to attend the Planning Commission training on November 16th. I understand Mr. Walker was interested.
Yes.
And was there another person identified?
Mr. Spring, well, are you interested in training, or?
Oh, is it free?
Well.
We may have if other commissions don't identify 2 people, then we would have an extra. So I can take an alternate name.
Erica?
Yeah.
I need to confirm that I'll be in town that week, and I'll do that soon.
Okay, commissioners, if you want to avail yourself of the training, would you contact Erica?
Actually, I pushed the button for another
okay, Mr. Spring.
thing. I'm the AMAT's liaison, I guess, with the commission, and I attended the last technical advisory committee where they brought up the new public involvement plan. And just for information, I don't know if the commission's aware of it, but the new proposal is to eliminate the role of the commission as citizen advisory committee. So if we want to discuss that, or if we have any comments on it, they didn't actually ask us for comments on this. I'm sure you'll all be really sad that you aren't the citizen advisory committee, the AMATs anymore, but I think the commission should be aware that this is in the works and it's probably going to be approved. So if we want to make a comment, we should.
Who would be the Citizen Advisory Committee?
They're going to create a new commission, or a new committee made up of private citizens. I don't know what the composition is. It's probably written in the ordinance. I'll bring that back
Would you bring that by? I have problems with that.
And I would just say, my opinion is if you can find people that are intimately interested in following transportation-related decisions, that's probably a good thing, but there ought to be a link to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if there's a separate committee, perhaps the compromise is, there's at least one member that sits on it or something to that effect. But it sounds like Chair wants to speak about it more.
Perhaps we can ask the transportation coordinator to speak to us at the directors' meeting and bring the ordinance with, or the proposal with them.
Anything else? We is adjourned.